Do you want me to, is he coming, there?
Hello. I think you're gonna say the name of the meeting and the day.
Okay. It is July 12th at 2:01, and we are calling our environmental advisory meeting to order here.
Wonderful. I'll take roll call. Jessica Namath.
Here.
Brad Freese.
Here.
Russ Redmond.
Here.
Clay Damon. Jill Wenta. Michelle Schraus.
Here.
Thomas Bradford.
Here.
Okay, I apologize. Okay, so we need to get an approval of the agenda. We have a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as submitted.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? All right, that carries here. I'm just trying to pull mine up, I apologize. Okay, so now we have communications from citizens. Do we have any communications from young or old citizens? Thank you for joining us at our meeting, guys. All right, and now we have our first presentation with Andy Studt. We can, I think, get right into. We're excited to have you. Thank you.
Glad to make it.
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I'll start out by thanking you so much for having me. I really appreciate these opportunities to engage with groups like this. It's one of my most important functions, I call it. Just to get on the same page as far as what's going out there on the coast, what's impacting us all, both countywide and locally in some of these areas. So again, thank you. I appreciate it, even on a sour weather day like today.
Yeah.
First slide here is a good one to start out. This was starting after our post-2022 project, so a couple years back, but it's a really clear aerial that shows some of the challenges that we're dealing with in this area. And that's both a very narrow barrier island, engineered dune system, and then significant nearshore hard bottom. That's a very protected, very important resource for Palm Beach County, for the local area. It's something that's not going away, but poses a lot of challenges for us when we're trying to affect these beach and shoreline stabilization projects.
May I ask a question on slide 1? Is this taken when that's the staging area for the sea glass?
That was when it was the parking area as it was originally designed to be. So that gets a little bit into the park side because they manage the back end of the dune. So the Department of Environmental Resources that I work for manages kind of the beach and dune component that's kind of the natural resources side. And then the Parks Department manages the public accessibility side. And that would include that area that those folks that were developing sea glass had a permit to park there while they were developing it. So that's what you'll see there is parking before the
Right, and
stockpile
so,
material got there.
and when our manager is saying that was a deal between the county and the developer, that was with the Parks and Rec Department of...
Yes,
Okay.
so we work very closely with them. We've been very aware of what's going on. We've got our own concerns with the stockpile that showed up there, and we were keeping very close track of it because that came from an area within the municipality of Tequesta, but we have certain provisions in the ULDC that apply to moving sand within the coastal area, and we were a little bit concerned to see it move and not go back there going into hurricane season. So we recently reached out to the developer with a letter to let them know that, hey, we're keeping track of this and we want to make sure that that sand gets back where it is supposed to go, because we have a sand preservation zone that says you can't move sand outside of this area, period. If you move it outside, you have to move it back, basically, because it's there for a protective purpose. So even if you're going to develop on top of it, there's other things that go into it there.
Okay, so if we had concerns, would we reach out to your department, though, or to Parks and Rec, or both, would you say?
I can point you the right direction no matter what's going on.
Okay.
So if it wasn't us that's dealing with it, it would be Parks and Rec that's directly managing the contractual relationship with the developer. So we've been working very closely with our joint concerns there. It was starting out as something, hey, we'll help each other out and provide a parking area, but it turned into something else, of stockpiling material that was moved off of an area that we're not concerned about, so.
Okay, so, and apologize for
no,
interrupting,
that's
it was
all
just
right.
that first visual got
I
me.
figured it would come up at some point, and we can talk more about it towards the end, but it's a concern of ours, and we're always looking very closely at the entire coastal environment for a number of reasons, especially heading into storm season. So I usually start out these presentations with something that you folks are probably well aware of, location. And it's not just real estate or that sort of thing, but that plays heavily into it. That's our number one economic driver is ecotourism. When folks aren't coming here to move here to stay or coming to visit, they're for something else, they're always going to the beach. You're coming to Wellington for equestrian purposes, they're making beach visits. Wherever you're going in Palm Beach County, you're making beach visits because that's our number one attraction. So we've got 47 miles of coastline up and down Palm Beach County. A little over 70% is critically eroded. Now, that doesn't mean that it's all falling into the ocean at any one time, but that's a state designation that is arrived at from an engineering sense of these areas are long-term eroding due to a number of processes. So they've been identified as areas that are available for cost share with the state to address that erosion. So it's a designation that's very important, but the amount in Palm Beach County is also a significant indicator of what a problem it is for us. We've got 4 inlets, starting Jupiter just to the south of here, Lake Worth, South Lake Worth, Boca Raton, extensive nearshore hard bottom. I mentioned that in the first slide, and you can see it there on the banner on the left side. That's a common feature throughout these slides. That banner on the left side is Singer Island, but we've got a very similar coastal environment here in very northern Palm Beach County, where we have a very thin barrier island, engineered dune feature, and then extensive nearshore hard bottom, but we've also got a lot of turtle nesting. You can see the crawls in that picture, and that's something we're starting to see pick up here as we hit peak sea turtle season. And we have a historically developed interface between the land and the sea, so we're at the end of the Atlantic hurricane track. And we get them from the Gulf area. It's not a matter of if we get hit by storms, it's a matter of when. So we're always in preparation mode to make sure that we're prepared. We're making sure that the areas that we manage are ready for those storm impacts if and when they happen. And when they happen, we recover from those storm impacts. A good example would be this past winter when we had kind of an anomalous winter. Had some really rough conditions from various fronts that moved through repeatedly due to the kind of supercharged El Nino effect. Generated really tropical storm-like effects on our coast, but without the designated storm impact. So luckily we have a program in place to handle it within our managed areas, and we're able to address those concerns. Really, that historically developed interface is what we're dealing with in a lot of Tequesta as well, the municipal area of Tequesta, but really the rest of Palm Beach County. We built our parks, our condominiums, a lot of these features right on top of the natural dune system. So that give and take that would naturally happen, we have a storm that impacts the dune and it takes years or even decades to recover. We no longer have that time because we built right on top of it. So we expect it to get better right away, but that's not really the case in reality. So it's a challenge for us in a management sense. Environmental considerations are huge. We've got critical nesting habitat. That picture on the lower right is actually during our most recent dune restoration project in response to this winter's erosion. Right within the Coral Cove Park area, we were starting the project after Singer Island project that we did. So we were time limited and resource limited with the mine being able to only produce so much sand. Starting the Coral Cove project really late February into March is not when we really like to start these kinds of projects because we're getting into the beginning of sea turtle season. We really try to avoid that, but when we do get nests in the beginning of season, we have to avoid them. In this case, we marked and avoided that nest. It creates a little bit of a notch, a hole in the dune, but it just goes to show that these turtles are there. They're going to be nesting really early in the season and pick up throughout the season. This Coral Cove and really North County area, Tequesta area, is some of the most densely nested areas in the state of Florida and in the country. So usually we compete with Brevard County and other counties just north of us for density of nesting. That's nests within a square footage of area. We have narrow perch beaches, so there's just a ton of nests there. It's a very important resource. During the course of the season, you could go a foot of beach without, or it's about one nest per foot in that area throughout the course of the season. So there's just a ton of nests throughout the beach and dune area. It's something we have to be very protective of and careful. I mentioned the nearshore hard bottom, that's evident in some of the photos we'll see. Lighting impacts in the top right is a big concern. That's something that our program, or the county's program, works on. I believe Tequesta has its own opt-out lighting monitoring program, but it very closely mirrors the county, and our staff have been working with Tequesta on making sure that we're on the same page there. So that's just to make sure that when these nesting sea turtles come ashore, when the hatchlings come out, they're looking for the bright part of the horizon. If there's a lot of artificial light, they'll go towards land. That's not a good thing. So we want to make sure we have those turtle-friendly lights. That's something we want to work very closely on and make sure that we're on the same page as trying to minimize artificial light during sea turtle nesting season. We've got those critical nearshore hard bottom areas. We've got offshore coral reefs, native dune plants, coastal wrack, the seaweed that shows up, shorebird nesting. There's just a ton that goes into this area that makes it kind of a narrow focused area of being one of the most critical habitats in Palm Beach County. So it's really a challenge to manage the area, but it's important that we get it right. So we spend a lot of time and focus on making sure that we're getting it right. Our program within the county is focused on long-term management. So you can see kind of our placement history, and it's really cyclical. And that's both on project timescales. So obviously there's a number of years between regular erosion and placements, but it's also driven by storms. We're going to get, again, regular storm impacts. So you'll see those in some of the peaks responding to recent and past storm events. So we really try to average it out on an 11-year average, and that gives us a better idea of how we're doing over the long term. We really can't look at it on a year-by-year basis because of those storm impacts, because of those rough winters that we have. So if we're able to kind of average out those peaks, it gives us a good idea of where we're moving long term. Cost is a huge challenge for us, not just in dredge sand with some of the larger beach nourishment projects, but with some of the dune restoration projects like Coral Cove. There's a lot of increasing pressure on those upland mine resources for that pretty white sand that we put out there in the dune-only areas. There's a lot of areas of Florida that are running out of sand. So for our larger beach nourishment projects, we're fortunate in Palm Beach County to have probably a couple decades worth at least of supply. For example, Jupiter-Carlin, our Juneau project area, or to the north of here, Jupiter Islands project area, there's still some sand resources offshore that are more like the native sand that we want to use if possible. It's a lot cheaper, plus it's a lot closer to the sand that's naturally occurring on the beach. But if we can't use that for these dune-only project areas, we're forced to use upland sand that is really native historic sand in dunes that were, ancient dunes from many thousands of years ago, but it's much more of a processed sand. It's a lot prettier, but it's a lot more expensive, and it's not quite as natural as the offshore sand. But again, it's getting more expensive. So you can see the graph trending upwards there, and I'll have a slide later on that shows that our most recent project was getting closer to $60 than $50 a cubic yard. So it's just increasing year by year. We've got counties to the south of us, Miami-Dade and Broward, that are essentially out of offshore sand. They've got more reef resources, and they've dug the areas they can dig, so they're putting more pressure on those inland sand mines to deal with the same issues we're dealing with. Funding is very important for us. Typically, this is the breakdown. It's the general pie chart we give. And that can skew year to year depending on the projects we have, so it's more of a long-term average percentage that we're giving here. But the biggest players are obviously the Army Corps of Engineers on the federal side, FEMA in response to storm damages. Municipal contributions, typically in most areas of the county, we request municipal cost share. Tequesta is a little bit different in that we have a lot of unincorporated county area within our Coral Cove project area, plus we have the park as a central access area. So it's not an area where we've requested Tequesta for cost share, but you move south to Jupiter, we have a cost share agreement with the town of Jupiter for a percentage of that project. City of Riviera Beach, Delray Beach, moving south, typically we have cost share agreements to try to fund this in a comprehensive sense. The state is also a great cost share partner for us. They're reliable and understanding the same things that we do. It's a tourism driver is the reason people come to Florida, so the state is great with both storm funding and with regular beach restoration funding. It's very important to point out that our county portion is not ad valorem taxes, so it's not something that your residents pay for as part of their regular property tax bill. It comes as a portion of our TDC bed taxes. So when people come and make a hotel stay anywhere in Palm Beach County, it could be out in Belle Glade, it could be anywhere here along the coast, a percentage, the 6th of that is going towards that beach fund. So it's really driven by tourism, and it's for tourism to maintain these publicly accessible, these beach areas. That's important for Tequesta. We're kind of at the edge of public accessibility in Tequesta. It's part of the reason we manage the project we do is based on public accessibility. So we've got Coral Cove Park that kind of centers this project area, and that's a feature that's common to a lot of our county shore protection areas. You have to have critical erosion where there's a big problem, and you have to have public accessibility for us to generate the cost share funds to deal with that problem. So we've got Coral Cove Park that operates as a central public accessible park. That's a primary access as defined by the state. That's anything with 50 or more spaces and restrooms. And then the south area of Coral Cove is considered a secondary access by the state. That's 50 or more spaces without public restrooms. Outside of those property areas, you get a half mile from Coral Cove Park, or you get a quarter mile from the south area as additional length for eligibility for cost share. So really our cost share could potentially extend south of our existing project area, but there are other concerns there that we'll get into in the coming slides. But that's just to mention that countywide, and in this area, the same thing, it's driven by that cost share to move forward with some of these projects.
I'll email this to everybody.
Coming up with a blank. I have some computer thinking going on. I've got a flash drive. If you want to try that.
Sure.
Same things on there.
Come on up. Curveball, right? Curveball.
The weather's always a curveball.
It was going so great.
It's always curveballs.
I hear ya. Which one?
Either one of the Tequesta ones. One's a PDF and one is a PowerPoint. Either one should show up fine.
It's a good note to self, though, to have as a backup if you're doing a
Always bring back.
That was good.
I've got a paper copy so I can
Oh,
read if
nice.
need be,
Yeah,
but
look, yeah, you've got all your bases covered.
It's not your first rodeo.
No.
not at all. I've been on, we've been calling it the road show because there's been so many impacts countywide really this past winter that there's been an increased level of engagement across the county. And that's good in a way, but it's also, a sign of the challenges we have.
I think you were here.
All right, yes, I was there. And that was the next slide. So coastal management challenges, that wraps into a big part of what we're dealing with within the village of Tequesta's municipal area. So we've got, like I mentioned in the slide before, we've got a pocket that's up in the park area and that covers Sea Glass, that recent condominium development. And there's some unincorporated pockets, but really the bulk of the village of Tequesta area is those southern 4 condo properties. And that wraps into some of the challenges that we see countywide and really exemplified here. We've got that development right along that interface of the dune and ocean area. So we've got historic development on top of that area of give and take, and it presents a management challenge for us. That area that would typically erode into the dune and we would be able to restore now has hardened structures. So those hardened structures are a good thing in many ways for the property owners because it protects their property, but it's a challenge for us that we can't necessarily go right in there and place sand on top of it because it's difficult in a regulatory sense. You can see our dune project area in the very lower right of that picture, and it's kind of consistent with what you're seeing with the armoring. We're not going to go much beyond what that armoring is existing with our dune project because it would just get lost to that regular wave action. So we can't really place an advanced dune there. Really, at a minimum, we could barely cover the rocks, but then we're dealing with another regulatory problem. If we're going to propose to cover those rocks, they're going to make us keep at least 3 feet of sand on top to try to make sure that sea turtles are happy. And that's kind of a perpetual maintenance obligation. That's a real difficulty for us to sign up for without having some additional space landward of there to be able to accomplish that goal. So in terms of engineered dunes, that's something you see where we have a lot of near shore hard bottom, and you can see it in this aerial photo. It's exposed there, those dark areas just offshore of the waves. There's a ton of important habitat there. And it's not all coral reef. The coral reefs are really offshore. There's coral that exists on this hard bottom, but this hard bottom is more important for fish habitat. So there's corals that grow on it, but it's really a historic formation when sea levels were a lot higher, and that was growing as part of a coral reef many, many years ago. But it's still a very important resource, again, both for fish habitat, for sea turtles to congregate on. That means it's very protected, both in a federal and a state regulatory sense, that we can't just go out there and widen the beach. So we've got a couple strategies to deal with coastal erosion. One of them is beach nourishment, where we build the beach out into the water. That's something that we see a lot of areas of Palm Beach County, but usually when you do that, there's not as significant of reef or nearshore hard bottom exposure. And the nearshore hard bottom that is exposed that we're going to cover, we have to build mitigation reef to make up for it. So we'd have to replace all the reef offshore if we wanted to build the beach out before we even built the beach out, and that can get tremendously expensive very quickly. And it's an area in Coral Cove and Tequesta where we've really got so much reef exposure that it would be cost prohibitive to build a wider beach into the water in both a regulatory and a construction sense. So we're stuck with either dune restoration or coastal armoring, and we see both in this area. We've seen coastal armoring historically in the Tequesta area, and we've seen dune restoration as we manage the area north of there. Dune restoration has its pluses and minuses. You keep a more natural habitat feature, but it's more repetitive maintenance. You have to get out there more often with these storm impacts to replace that dune. We've still got a park that's built right on top of the natural dune system, but we're keeping that protective buffer right in front of it. It's costly, but right now it's cost effective to continue that. We're always analyzing how that's going to break out in the future. One thing that always comes up is structures. You know, could we build out groins or jetties beyond there to mitigate erosion? You can, but it's extremely difficult and almost not possible in a regulatory sense right now, because you get into concerns with federal resource agencies about how the turtles will be protected. So it's kind of a catch-22 for us. We're losing the beach and we're saying we can't have turtles nesting, but they're saying if we build something, then it'll create an impact to the turtles that are just offshore, and without any data that we can't prove that that wouldn't harm them, then we can't do it. So it's an emerging area of concern for the past couple decades, and I think we're going to sort it out in the next couple, really the next decade or two, because it's just getting to be more and more of a challenge. But right now, to permit structures in an area like this is tremendously costly. It would take many years, and the cost effectiveness is the biggest question. Really the biggest benefit to this area is regional sand management and regional sand movement. And that's something that we kind of saw this past winter. You know, we saw the historic impacts to Jupiter Inlet Colony. We saw severe erosion within the village of Tequesta. But really, history is our measure of time. You know, we all live in a 24/7 news cycle. We expect, oh, this is terrible, it's happening. We expect it to be fixed right away. But really, this has happened before in a lot of senses. The Jupiter Inlet Colony area, when it was eroded, we saw that happen in the early 80s. In 82, 83, a similar storm series came through, produced similar erosion that eroded up under homes. It's just our sense of keeping up with things is much more accelerated these days because we've got better images and video of it happening to these areas where we've developed on top of the natural system. But that doesn't mean the erosion's going away, and doesn't mean it's something we're not going to have to deal with. So we've got the dune restoration in this very sensitive area. One of the biggest feeders that helps stabilize this area, and you can see it in this image, is town of Jupiter Island and Martin County's project to the north of there. They have a large beach nourishment, and it's kind of feeding sand to the entire area. So sand moves north to south throughout Palm Beach County, 99% of it. You can see some sand move south to north during severe storm events, but really the large majority of sand movement happens during the winter with those regular nor'easters we have, those regular strong northeast winds. They're pushing that sand from north to south. This photo shows town of Jupiter Island's project is moving a ton of sand in front of Blowing Rocks. Blowing Rocks is not very Blowing Rocksy right now because there's a huge sand pulse moving in front of it, and you know it would take a very big wave to get up and impact those rocks right now because this sand is moving a pulse north to south. This image was taken fall 2023 when that sand was just starting to move south. And we see a erosional hotspot just south of there. So in the near ground of that image, you see a lot of exposed reef, a lot of white rock area that's newly exposed. That's that hotspot that continued to move south through Tequesta, through Jupiter Inlet Colony, a sand-starved area that caused erosion, but it was backed up by this large sand pulse moving from north to south. And that's what we've seen over the past couple months is as we've normalized conditions, the beaches have started to widen back up. We've seen that pulse of sand start to move into Village of Tequesta area. That's something we were messaging the residents 6-8 months ago that, look, these impacts are going to happen, but really it's time that continues to move this sand north to south, and we will expect to see improved conditions. It's just because of the resources there, we can't necessarily go out and place material anywhere and everywhere that we want to, both in a cost sense and in a regulatory sense. So a little bit about our dune restoration project. It's about a mile long. It runs from the northern county line south to the northern edge of Tequesta Towers area. It runs through all of Coral Cove Park and runs north into the unincorporated county area where there's condo developments. Those condos, and you can see it in some of the aerials, their development is set back a little bit landward of a lot of the condos that you'll see in the Village of Tequesta area. So we're able to still manage a dune restoration project in that area. They don't have any hardened structures. They don't have any armoring that we're worried about placing sand on top of. So that's one of the reasons that we're able to go north into that area. We also work with the town of Jupiter Island. We share our easement agreements with them to effectuate their project. So they have a smaller dune restoration project just north of ours for private property areas where they come and use the Coral Cove Park as an access area to place sand following storm events. You can see the frequency of our placement there has gone up a little bit and the volumes have gone up. That's kind of a trend countywide with erosion that we've seen. These last 3 years have been atypical. Usually we wouldn't do these projects 3 years in a row, but for storm impacts. And it's not the first time it's happened. We've had regular storm impacts year after year. You can see 2013 was after Sandy, and then we had additional impacts after that. So we get these multiple impacts per year. Somewhat regularly. It's just over a larger time scale that we're not used to dealing with. And again, you have some notes there on cost of the various projects that have gone up over the years. And we've obviously installed native dune plants to recover what was lost during those project cycles. So that's a quick graphic of the project area. Our sand for this project, again, we can't use offshore sand because we can't place or widen the beach. So we can't use waterborne sand. We have to keep it all above the mean high tide line. Generally, in our practice, we're trying to stay at least 10 meters or a little over 30 feet above the mean high water line. That way we can say this sand isn't reasonably going to be regularly getting into the reef system. It's something that's only going to be impacted during storm events, and that's where really what it's designed for, is during these significant wave events and storm events. It acts as a secondary sand source to rebuild the beach more quickly, but also to prevent infrastructure damage in some of the park areas and some of the areas that we're concerned with.
The yellow dots are those construction access points?
Yes, those are where we access the beach. So for this project area, typically we've just used the park areas and access. This time we had, through this past winter, we had more significant erosion in the south area of the project. We had 15-foot tall escarpments. So our restoration area was more focused there. It was more cost effective to move through the dune in that south area, bring the trucks right over the dune and place directly there rather than hauling it all the way down the beach with off-road trucks.
And for the residents that have reached out to me expressing concern about, like, if there was a storm that came and the water, is there the plans to close? I mean, what are the concerns with the cut through the dune there, or what are the plans to fix?
The accesses are restored to the elevation that's next to them, so it's consistent with the rest of the dune. They only cut it down to get the trucks onto the beach, and then following that, they restored it up to the existing elevation adjacent to it. The one feature that will remain, we'll plan to keep that as an access in the future. Since we cut through the sea grapes, now we've planted native panic grass to restore it with native grass. It's a good habitat feature. We put dune fence to keep turtles from getting through. But we're not going to plant sea grapes there because if we have to do this project in the future, we want to more easily be able to get out to the beach in that same place. but it's not gonna allow water to get through any more easily than it would anywhere else. That's more of a volume of material thing, which we put back in place there with sand.
Okay. Thank you.
This project was initially 100% county funded because it wasn't anticipated. It's a little bit odd in that it wasn't a declared tropical impact, so it wasn't something we'd be eligible for FEMA dollars, but through the regular state program, we should be eligible for about 50% cost share through our regular funding source with DEP. These are some images that were from really November of last year through January that showed some of the worst of the erosion. The bottom two images are actually after things got a little bit better and we had some natural recovery. You know, during the worst of the erosion, you can see it in the top left image, we had the waves coming right up to the base of the dune in the park area, and really south of there we had, again, 10 to 15 foot escarpments. That's something that we can't really leave there for both, you know, beach users, kids using the beach. We don't want them digging into the dune and having it collapse on them. We don't want turtles during turtle season digging into the edge of that and having it collapse on them. So there's a number of environmental and physical and really human being reasons why we have to restore this, in addition to just managing this as trying to keep it as much of a natural area as possible, given the development that we have. And then we move to post-restoration pictures. So the aerial images were taken in early May of this year, and same for that lower right picture. We've already got the plants that started out as you know, little seedlings that were put in late March, have already started to grow with the various rains we've gotten. They're doing really well. So we've really started to establish the typical dune that we'd like to see out there, and it's ready for the coming storm season. We placed about 35,000 cubic yards of material, a little bit less than the prior year. The prior year was due to erosion from Hurricane Nicole, again, a significant storm impact. But really this past winter affected the southernmost area more, so we were able to get away with a little less placement than
recording in progress.
We got it in just before the bulk of sea turtle season. You know, I mentioned that we had some nests in the project area. I think we had 4 or 5 nests as the project was going on. Some project areas, large beach nursements, you can have a contracted, permitted turtle monitor move those nests. This area is not that type of situation. This area, if there's a nest, we mark it and we set buffers around it and we avoid it just to make sure that we don't get anywhere near it. So a lot of protection goes in ahead of these projects, during these projects, and after these projects to make sure we're monitoring the resources, make sure there are no impacts before, during, or after. Sure. With that, I'll take any questions you have. And this is
Recording in progress.
This is a closing slide that was also taken at the beginning of May that shows, again, the beach is naturally starting to accrete, starting to grow back after that rough winter we had. That's something that we message often that's hard for residents to get a hold of when the worst of the erosion's going on is, hey, the beach looks terrible, what are you gonna do about it? Well, we have to see what's still in the near shore, because all of that beach didn't just go completely away. It's still going to naturally move back onto the dry beach by typical processes. And we have to wait for a normalization of conditions for that to happen. And we have to get surveys following to see how much sand is still in the near shore, see how much we have to deal with. So through those normal processes, we've started to see that sand move back onto the beach. Again, we've seen a lot of that sand move north to south from town of Jupiter Islands project area. And we've seen really an improvement project-wide. And we've restored the dune areas sufficiently that the storm season we should be ready to go. And again, one of the biggest things about this project, both for the areas that we actively manage and south of there, is when that sand comes off of those dune areas during storm events, it's not lost, it's moving south and protecting beaches south thereof. So it's really kind of a regionally beneficial project, even if it's not directly placing sand in front of properties for a variety of reasons. Any questions you have?
You want to start, Michelle? You want to,
I do, just a general question. So looking at the stats, the frequency and the intensity of the storms that we've seen in the past, I think it was 5 years on that data. And then...
Yeah, that, the frequency of the projects went back to 89, our first dune restoration project there.
Mm-hmm. The increases, what
yes.
well, there's some years missing, but with that thought process, and then also the scarcity of sand, what's the long-term thoughts on how this gets approached?
Well, it's tough to predict. It's a lot like predicting climate. And it's one of those things where hurricanes don't necessarily arrive at our doorstep on a regular basis, year-to-year sense, but when they do, they can be repeated impacts, and it goes to longer cycles. So we've got a lot of things that affect regular storm cycles that go multi-decades. There's a lot of circulations in the ocean current patterns that can produce more storms over a 40-year pattern and less during those intervening periods. We've entered over the last 10 to 20 years one of those more active periods. So we
Okay.
kind of expect to see more storms, and then with increasing sea surface temperatures, changing climate, you can see more quickly a ramp up of those storms. But one of the big things that I like to message is it's not a matter of if, again, but when.
Right.
So it's a matter of long-range planning, and that's the importance. We collect annual surveys, so every year we're going out there with an engineering team. We're collecting surveys along the coast, making sure we understand what's going on so we can prepare for whatever the next impact's going to be. We're looking at long-range sand trends. If we see something 10 or 15, 20 years out, then we're probably already planning for it now. We're more fortunate in a sand sense and a preparatory sense than a lot of counties south of us, but we're starting to see some of those impacts in historically developed areas that are challenging to us. So it's an ever-evolving process. I guess that's the bottom line.
Definitely. I was just wondering for the sand replenishment part, or sand source, if it's already getting difficult, what would be the long-range resource when we can no longer access
It's,
what we have
as
here?
we continue to run into challenges with offshore sand, which there's new technologies emerging there as well. We've have a new screening technology we've been able to use our past couple beach nourishment projects that have allowed us to look at other borrow areas for beach nourishments that we typically wouldn't have looked at, because we can now screen out the shell and the rock that are in those areas offshore to make sure it's okay for people and for turtles. There's always going to be more inland sand available because there's just tremendous deposits. It's just a matter of cost and how cost effective that is. I think we'll probably increasingly look at structures as a way to deal with a lot of this. It's just right now the regulatory hurdle is there. There's a lack of understanding or data there on the federal and the state side, particularly the federal side, of saying, if you can't say that something's not going to be bad, then we have to assume it's going to be bad. That's, again, the catch-22 for us is, how can you do that to us? Let us do an example project and get the data for you, but you can't even do that in a regulatory sense. So that's one of our biggest hurdles. It's killed recent projects south of here trying to do the same thing, but we'll get over that hurdle. It's just going to be a challenge, that's for sure. It'll be the challenge of my career, I think.
Thank you.
Has anybody looked into like Massachusetts and what they're doing with their beach?
We have a lot of recommendations about what's going on in the northeast of the U.S. because we have a lot of folks that move from here to there and think it's directly applicable. The biggest challenge we have is 100% of Palm Beach County's beaches are critical nesting habitat for marine sea turtles. So anything we do out there has to be vetted from a sea turtle sense.
Well,
We also
go ahead.
We also have critical habitat on the ocean side, both breeding habitat for sea turtles and fish habitat. So National Marine Fisheries is one of the biggest players that, they serve a very important role, certainly, but they're one of the biggest roadblocks of us trying to permit projects that might be effective in stabilizing the coastline.
I believe that Massachusetts, by 2025, you can no longer hard armor, and there's no revetment, there's no hard armoring allowed. And they're allowing the ocean to eat the houses, if you're too
Well, and
close.
that's an unpopular thing. I always say that gets into politics because
Right.
you start asking people to give up property and land, and that's a different conversation.
But
Right
if
now-
we're looking at the beaches and which have the most if we're concerned with that resource from a
And Palm Beach County is a little bit protected in that sense because that natural nearshore hard bottom that you see just offshore really protects us in a lot of ways because it's a layer that acts as a natural wave break. It kind of comes up as you get landward. So the area in front of Sea Glass where you see that Anastasia rock formation actually emerge, that's present throughout our coastal area. It would just take more erosion west of there to get to it. Got a phone call or maybe a question coming in.
And I mean, does the sand not then also cover that that, you know, I mean, if it is pushed offshore, it covers that?
It covers it, but, you know, long-term erosion isn't just storms or sea level rise or those things. It's also management of inlets, and that's something I didn't really mention or touch on, but a lot of our erosion comes over the last 100 years of managing inlets. So we manage inlets for a variety of reasons. We've got natural inlets throughout Florida. Jupiter's a natural one just south of here, but you wouldn't have driven boats in and out of it naturally.
It's not a natural.
It's a natural inlet. It had natural flow from the river moving out, but it was a very shallow inlet. It was not
It would
naturally.
close, yeah.
It was not naturally navigable, so you couldn't naturally move a boat in and out of it. We've stabilized it with jetties. The Jupiter Inlet District has, and they've maintained it in a dredging sense, so it's navigable. That acts as kind of a sand vacuum over the last 100 years. Same with the inlet north of here, St. Lucie Inlet, same with Palm Beach Inlet. Those large inlets and vacuums are sucking up sand on a year-by-year basis. Until about 30 years ago, these inlets weren't being managed in a way that was getting sand back out to the beach. They were just side disposing of that dredge material. They weren't putting it in an area that got it back into the coastal system. So we have a multi-decadal, almost 100-year period of taking sand out of the coastal system and not putting it back. So you'll see that in the flood shoals that are inshore. You know, all those sandbars that are near the intercoastal waterway aren't just from dredging, they're also from slow buildup of sand coming in the inlet. So that's where a lot of the beach sand went, and we're trying to make up for that deficit for the past 30 years and into the next 30 years. And that's one of the biggest erosion challenges we face, is a deficit of sand that we're trying to make up for maintaining those port and inlet facilities, which are important for a whole host of reasons. I mean, we're not going to shut that down. They're important for navigability,
Of course,
recreation, flushing, for all the resources that have grown out of that.
Yes, of course. No, again, I've lived here in Tequesta over 35 years, so I've seen, you know, our critically eroded barrier island kind of not seem like we're getting much more beach, you know, with all of the renourishment. It seems kind of like an ongoing problem.
And it will continue to be an ongoing challenge for all of those issues. And
Right.
The thing that makes it most challenging is all the resources involved. So
Yeah.
not only are we trying to address it, but we're trying to address it in one of the most critical habitat features in the state.
Okay. Russ, do you have any?
He actually answered most of my questions. I had them, but they're all been answered.
That's great. Tom?
Yeah, a couple. So what can we do? I probably can't do it alone, but how do we keep Miami-Dade and Broward away from
Or sand.
our offshore resources?
Right.
Is there, you know, like in the mining world, you stake a claim or a permit and it's yours to develop or take? Don't they have any kind of controls like that going on out there?
There are some controls, particularly at the state level. So everything out to, I think it's 3 miles is state waters, and that's where a majority of the borrow areas are. Really, the technology in our area doesn't exist, or it's only starting to emerge to go beyond that to deeper depths. And once you get out there, you're starting to get into a lot more offshore reef features that are going to be a challenge to permit borrow areas anyway. So most of our borrow areas in Palm Beach County are within state waters, and we have the opportunity via the state regulatory process to challenge borrow areas that may be a concern to us. And the state's been pretty good and proactive about that. I've heard rumblings about that for the past 20 years of Miami-Dade and Broward wanting to come up and take our sand. And we've been very protective of saying, you know, we're not going to be happy about that. And the state's been very protective in saying, you know, it's really not going to be a good thing to move it that far outside of the system. Federal waters are another thing. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is allowing more lands leases that are further away, but federal waters in Palm Beach County are so deep and so offshore that it's not really a concern for us. They're not really feasible to get after them. Further north of here, we see the shelf kind of extend out. Once you get into Martin and St. Lucie and really north of there, that's where you'd be a little bit more concerned. But the sail distance from here to Miami-Dade or Broward would be so great that they're just as well off going with mined sand. That's a resource that's continuing to be developed, but it continues to be costly because of the transport costs.
Is it still true that if you have a large enough area to do that sand dredging versus truck sand is more cost effective?
Yes, most certainly, and that gets back to one of the slides that I showed towards the beginning, kind of the cost difference between the two. We've gotten close to $60 a cubic yard for upland sand, but for dredge sand, we're still between $15 and $20 a cubic yard. So it's a third or less the cost of mined sand.
Don't know what.
One of-
there goes James now. Oh my God.
So,
Starting over there now? No.
Hey, you better let them know.
Yeah, guys, we can
Just
hear
hit
you.
Hit that little
Guys, can
mute
you
button at
mute?
the top right of
there
their
She can hear
window.
now.
Can you guys mute? We can hear you.
You can mute them, top
Darian
right.
and Jill,
Can you guys hear me?
we can hear you now.
Who is that, Jill?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
Jill's glasses.
Okay. No problem.
So, Andy,
so cost is a huge issue, and it's more for the beach nourishment areas. We would consider maybe using upland sand if dredge sand weren't available for those areas. But for like Coral Cove area, we're limited to that upland sand only because we can't bring dredge sand in because of the permit regulations. So the dredge sand is waterborne sand, it's suspended in a water solution. If we were to place that on the beach, then we'd be directly impacting the nearshore hard bottom. And that would be, again, tremendously cost prohibitive.
yeah.
In this area, as you get further south, in some of the beach nourishment areas, we've already mitigated for some of that reef, we can do that. But again, to the north of here, town of Jupiter Island, they've still got significant bar area resources. They're still able to do that with their project area, and I would expect that to continue in at least a decade or two to come.
Two quick final questions from me. One, do you have any idea when the county / state / whoever is going to develop what we would typically call up here the southernmost undeveloped portions of what appears to be future expansion for Coral Cove Park?
I do not have a timeline for that. I know that Parks Department, I believe, has that in their long-range plans.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they have funding for it currently. So right now, what you're seeing going on out there is the road drainage work that's going on, and that's to address the long-term drainage issue, but that's more of a road and bridge
Stabilization.
project, yes, exactly. But the park development area, we keep pretty close tabs with them, and I haven't heard of anything basically in the next 10 years to do that. So I think it'll be probably some time. But I know there are some very long-range plans to develop that.
Last question, I promise. Off the top of your head, how many cities along the coast of Palm Beach County have departments or at least one staff member assigned to coastal management?
Not that many. We've got 19 coastal municipalities, and I can tell you that town of Jupiter handles it more administratively. Really, the county manages the town of Jupiter and the town of Juneau areas because we have such significant park ownership and county ownership through that area that we're managing it directly and doing a lot of the legwork. And again, we have cost share from them to facilitate their engagement. But I engage with the town of Jupiter and Juneau similarly as I'm doing here. But they do not have direct staff that are dedicated to coastal management there. Same for City of Riviera Beach. Town of Palm Beach is the next nearest that has a direct coastal manager position. Delray Beach has a public works assistant director that works on coastal management issues, but not a direct coastal manager. Boca Raton and Palm Beach are the only ones with direct, like my position, a coastal manager. The rest of them are through usually public works, parks, a variety of those, or just town administration. A lot of the municipalities are smaller throughout the coast, similar to Village of DeQuesta. where we handle it through their administrative or public works or development staff.
Andy, you should not talk so much because you just made me think of another question. So a lot of the cities have a staff person that when problems arise, they say, okay, you go work with Andy, okay? Do you see benefit for those type of people to go to the beach I forgot the name of, beach association conferences and things like that to keep them educated about the beach environment and trends and so forth?
I think that's always helpful. I have to mention, I'm a board member of the Florida Shore and Beach Preservation Association. But I can say, being a board member and prior to that, for the past 10 years, before being a board member, it's tremendously helpful to keep up with both emerging technology, what's going on in the coastal world, particularly in an environmental, regulatory, and construction sense. So you see a lot of great presentations out there, kind of learning about what's going on around the state, both in a regulatory sense and a construction sense. So it's for FSBPA, Florida Shore and Beach Preservation Association, we have 2 conferences a year. It's definitely worth it for me at the county level. We see some of those same municipal entities, Delray Beach, Town of Palm Beach, that are at every one of those conferences. They've got more significant shoreline areas, but all the same issues that Tequesta has. So I think it's beneficial.
Okay.
But I have a stake in it a little bit.
Thank you, Andy.
I am gonna try and go to the one in the fall.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Jeremy wanted to also, but he's got a conflict.
But
Okay.
the one in the fall is not too bad distance-wise. It's in Bonita Springs, so right across the state. Not too bad of a drive.
Okay. Any more, are you, yeah, we're good?
I'm good.
Yeah, so I brought this up, I don't know, months ago, to provide temporary beach nourishment where, I don't know what you would call it, like a, kind of like a jetty that you can remove in a sense. And I brought this up to the group months ago. It never really went anywhere. I thought Jeremy had maybe emailed you information on this. It's called Sand Saver.
Haven't heard of Sand Saver.
Okay.
But I can tell you, anything structurally that goes on the beach would have to go through, it's still a regulatory process. We've
The same as a permanent structure?
had a jetty type feature, yes, it would. And it gets back to, again, our issue, all the sand moves north to south. So if you're gonna put anything out in Village of Tequesta, especially as it gets to Jupiter Inlet Colony, especially with the concerns they have, they're gonna have an opportunity through the state regulatory process to say that's gonna harm us because it's gonna hold up sand from getting to us.
I only use jetty because it's the only
Yeah,
kind of permanent structure. It doesn't jut out.
So,
This
yeah,
particular
jetty
thing?
juts out and that would prevent sand moving north to south. Temporary armoring is available through the state's permitting process. You'd still have to get it permitted. We've had a little bit of a unique situation since Hurricane Nicole, and that we've had a governor's emergency final order to affect those kinds of armoring projects much more quickly and easily than would typically be available. That's still going on now because the recovery from Hurricanes Ian and Nicole has been so lengthy and extensive. Palm Beach County was included in those impacts because we had significant impacts from Nicole. But anything you put there is generally going to be allowed to stay for, I believe it's 60 days, and then it would have to be removed. Unless you had a long-term plan for a seawall or another improvement, and then it could stay until you got through the process for permitting that improvement. So if you had some armoring feature that you wanted to put out there, you could get a permit to temporarily armor, but the state would have to review it, they'd have to approve it. The county doesn't have any role in it, the state's the regulatory entity, and there's no guarantee that they would, particularly in Palm Beach County because of the turtle nesting. So they'd have to be assured that this isn't gonna be something that is going to impact as we get into what we're in now, the turtle nesting season. We've had some situations that are somewhat similar, well, exactly similar in Singer Island, where condo properties have gotten temporary armoring permits, and they put in trap bags, which are basically the big square mesh surrounded bags that hold sand. They put those in, they had the 60-day temporary permit, they've gotten that extended because they have pending seawall permits or redevelopment permits in to leave them in during sea turtle nesting season. It's not common to have those features be allowed during turtle nesting season, but due to the extensive erosion that we've recently had, it's very situational. In this situation, it was permitted to remain during nesting season with additional monitoring and with those pending applications. So it gets into a complex web very quickly of regulatory processes, but when you're starting to lose land, you're getting into that web whether you want to or not.
Yeah, man, I just see that, it's a never-ending battle.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well,
creative
and
solutions
what's the
to at
alternative?
least supplement
Set your
that.
property back, and that's not popular either. If we had some of these properties give up 50 feet of property and remove all the structures, then maybe we could move in there, but we're not guaranteeing that in a Category 5 storm that all that sand's going to stay, because there's no guarantees. Seawalls fail in those situations, so there's a certain amount of risk that comes with living along the coast too, and that's one of the challenging messages that we've had to deliver this past winter.
Brad, we sent your sand saver thing to Joe Chasen, the Jupiter Inlet District guy, who's a coastal engineer. And I believe he said that the sand saver, basically, it works in a very small area to trap that sand, but it's basically taking the sand from everywhere else that would normally migrate.
Mhm.
So it's very useful in some of the instances that, I think it was used at a hotel in Kenya.
Yeah.
But it would work to the detriment of every other property around it.
Got it,
So,
yeah.
I'll send it to you, and you can.
And
I think it was
because of
also
the-
plastic, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, that's
that was-
the big reason why we,
Yeah.
we never talk about it anymore, but
Yeah.
it just looked unique and novel, and I was
We've
just
gotten a lot of
trying to supplement that.
interest and honestly sales calls over the past 6 months and the past couple of years, because we've had a couple rough storm seasons, but unique technologies that would seem to work elsewhere that we have to tell them, unfortunately, in a regulatory sense, we're not interested because we know we couldn't get it permitted, or if we did, given our storm climate, I expect that to be beat up in pieces on the beach. So really it's big rocks or it's more sand here. And the permitting is a challenge for all those things.
Yeah.
Got another question to that.
Good, yeah.
So I just sort of remembered this. Is there ever a time where you decide, hey, let's not do this sand project? Just because, recently, from the inlet down to Carlin Park, all that sand just went on the beach, but that was a pretty big beach at the time of
And
the start of that
that's
project.
inlet maintenance dredging. That's what Joe would have talked
Right,
about
I
if you were
figured
here,
that was.
that's regular. They're required by their permit to operate the inlet to move that sand south, because that's the natural process. So by
Right.
maintaining that channel there, they have to keep that sand moving south. There are a number of instances where we've had to tell people, this past winter, Singer Island, a similar project area to Coral Cove and Tequesta, but more hardened, more far along in the same process, much more seawalls in place. We couldn't get access to the central project area. We've been doing projects there for 20 years, dune restoration projects. We were able to restore the north and the south, southern quarter mile, a third of a mile area. There was a central 2/3 of a mile area we tried to get into, we had plans to get into. Due to the conditions, we could not get construction equipment in there because there were seawalls in place. We couldn't physically get heavy equipment in there, and we had to tell them, we know things are bad there. We know this has typically been a project area of ours, but we can't physically get there. And again, there's a certain amount of ownership that you have to take to realize that we're doing it for a number of reasons. Environmental, tourism, infrastructure protection is an ancillary benefit to private properties with a lot of things we do, because we're using public dollars for all these projects. So we had to walk away from an area, and it was very unpopular for the residents in that area because we couldn't physically get there. If it was a park, it's a different situation, because we can operate anywhere we want to in a park, and we can find a way to get there. But with private properties and condos, you're limited in a construction sense about how you can get out to the beach. So there are those situations we've had recently, and even before that in 2019, we walked away from a state and federal permit in South Palm Beach to build groin structures to stabilize the beach, because we had regulatory conditions through a 10-year-long permitting process that we couldn't abide by. Basically continuous sand placement to make sure the beaches downdrift weren't eroded. And we said we can't continuously monetarily place sand. And we had the southern municipal entity threatening to sue us and say, if you do this permit, we'll sue you and make sure you don't. So it gets very much into this is our sand, this is our sand. You have to have really everybody on board in a regional sense to do something. And even then, the permitting is the biggest challenge in an environmental regulatory sense.
But generally, if there's sand to dump, you're looking to dump it, basically.
Within our permitted areas, yes. If we have the funding and the permits in place and we have damages and we're looking to long-term stabilize that shoreline for all those reasons that I mentioned, yeah, we want to maintain both residents walking up and down the beach and for turtles nesting, for shorebirds, all those reasons, we're actively looking to maintain that resource.
Have they ever looked into more piers, or even if not the piers, just the poles for the piers? Because I've just sort of random observation noticed that there tends to be more sand near piers.
The pier was a regulatory issue for the Juneau project area when it went in, because it has a sand holding effect. So we had to demonstrate that we weren't holding up too much sand to go further south. So we had enough project area to the south of there to demonstrate, hey, we can place sand south here to
It's
make
the same
up for it.
problem with the neighboring.
But if you talk about piers, it's the same regulatory process as a groin or a breakwater, in that, hey, you're gonna hold sand, it's great for this area, but you have to make sure that the area downdrift of you is gonna continue to get sand.
Right.
So it's long-term, again, I see that as being more of a solution. That's what's gonna stabilize sand, but getting over the environmental and the litigious regulatory hurdles will be the big challenge.
Anybody else? I know I have a few. I was just curious what like the main differences with our critically eroded areas and obviously there's got to be some sort of differences, I would assume, for a critically eroded barrier island versus like, you know, a beach that's coming off the mainland, right?
So, again, critical erosion is a state designation that provides us the opportunity for cost share, and we demonstrate that by having long-term engineering surveys to say this area is eroding long-term, so we need to manage it. Not all areas that are critically eroded are actively managed. I believe out of the 30, have that figure there, 36 miles that are critically eroded out of 47. We have 26 miles in Palm Beach County that are actively managed, so there are active projects, whether that's county projects or municipal projects. So not all of the critically eroded areas are actively managed. There are areas downdrift or updrift of those areas that are critically eroded that are not actively managed. So Tequesta is an example of that. Our project area runs, again, to Tequesta Towers, and south of there, the critical erosion line runs, I can't really demonstrate it with the clicker, but it runs into Jupiter Inlet Colony and stops probably about a third of the way into Jupiter Inlet Colony. So it's all considered critically eroded, but there's a lot of other factors, as we talked about, that goes into actually managing it. So there's a potential for cost share, there's demonstration of long-term shoreline recession there, but there's not necessarily an easy way to address it. Generally, areas updrift of inlets, so just north of Jupiter Inlet, are not going to be critically eroded because the sand's moving north to south. That inlet acts as a barrier. It's generally stacking sand north of it. That was my message to Jupiter Inlet Colony residents as the erosion was going on. Was, look, this is bad. You'll be one of the first ones to benefit during recovery because you'll have that feature of the inlet stacking up sand on top of you. It's just that, again, we built on top of the natural system, and when these impacts happen, they're alarming, but it takes time for recovery, and you'll be one of the first ones to recover because you have that natural but maintained feature of stacking up sand north of you.
Okay, and so for us, for example, that have a critically eroded beach, is there any, like if we had had somebody that worked on staff that would be, you know, is there anybody in our county watching to make sure that if in Martin County they decide to build a pier, for example, and stop our sand from getting down to us, Is something like that in place, or is that something that would fall on us to kind of keep an eye out for?
Oh, we're watching it.
You guys, okay.
I'm watching it.
Okay.
And that wouldn't happen there, because, number one, it's all private property in southern Martin County. You've got Blowing Rocks Preserve that's very protected. There's no opportunity for a public pier up until you get to Hope Sound. And there you have their beach nourishment project that's north and south of there, so really they're a big benefit to this area in moving sand. They're injecting large pulses of sand into the system. They're probably one of the biggest benefits to Village of DeQuesta is their project areas.
Okay.
That's Hope Sound, you said?
Town of Jupiter Island.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I thought you said, okay.
Town of Jupiter Island has a coastal manager. They work very closely with the county, Martin County, to affect that project area where there's a large beach nourishment. They get offshore sand at a similar bar source to our Jupiter Carlin project area. It's about a mile and a half offshore of this area. In an area, and that's important to mention, any of these borrow areas that are qualified with the state are in an area where, in an engineering sense, there's no chance of that sand making it back into the coastal system. So there's a line basically out there in the sand where you can determine in an engineering sense that that sand won't reasonably make it back within the coastal system and wind up onto the beach. That's important for nearshore borrow areas, particularly in Singer Island and Palm Beach. Really, these borrow areas are much further offshore. They're in 70, 80 feet of water. They're historic beaches that were really 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. That was the beach out there because of lower sea levels.
Wow, that's cool. And is there any, something that we've been talking about doing here on the river, for example, and educating homeowners that might have an opportunity during redevelopment to restore to a natural or revert to a natural shoreline, the benefits, and trying to educate them publicly? I was wondering if there's anything being done with developers on the beach to potentially educate them on the on this essentially, and the problems faced with having these different structural stabilizations or not being able to potentially access them in the future and that sort of thing.
The developer approach, especially on the coastal front, is a tough one because they're usually bigger developers, and however they do it, they're going to sell it as what they're selling it as, and
Yeah. I just wasn't sure if
It'd be very-
statewide, maybe there was some sort of an incentive program or an education program, if there's anything that's been looked into.
There are new requirements through the Office of Resiliency that just went into effect over the past couple of years that provide both regulatory requirements and funding opportunities to meet those requirements. There's a requirement for slip studies now, basically studies that determine what sea level rise impacts will have on the property. So a lot of that's starting to be engaged at the state level. There's nothing at the county level, it's all state regulated, but a lot of that has started to come into play. How developers handle that, again, is going to be a little bit more predictable and just, it's economic.
Right, of course. And I was just going to say, are you aware of any grant money out there for them if they were wanting to revert?
Revert.
In order,
would be
in
a
other words,
tough
to
one,
restore a
but trying
dune and
to-
move,
Trying to do an environmentally friendly project, there are benefits, but I don't know that there's a lot of grant money to do it because it's redevelopment. You're getting money as you're doing it.
One of your slides had the CCCL line in it, I believe, wasn't there?
Yes.
Just for my fellow board members to see too.
And if I can interrupt you, the slip studies are only
There, that one.
needed for public projects, correct? They're not needed for private developments?
I thought they were required for private, but I'm not positive on that.
Only private? Or what was it you said?
Only public,
Only
Jay
public.
was mentioning.
I think initially it was only for public projects. I don't know if it's for private projects. But it's where you require a sea level rise
Right.
study as part of the project.
Right, well, and I guess that, so again, you see this red line is where they advise we build behind, the coastal construction control line, right? Is that from my understanding?
So
The
it's a
county
state-
buildings are behind that
It's a state regulatory
97.
line. It basically says anything seaward of that line, you're going to have much more regulations in place.
Stricter
You can build past it, even if there was no development there based on adjacent development. If your neighbors have buildings that are out that far, then you're gonna be able to go out so far. but you're gonna have much more engineering scrutiny on your building. You're gonna have to make sure that it can survive certain storm impacts. You're probably not gonna be able to put a seawall in if you have significant protection. They wanna make sure in a 100-year storm that you're not gonna be impacted. So there's a lot more scrutiny that goes into it. A lot of our development in Palm Beach County, and you can see here, this slide doesn't extend into southern Tequesta, but most of our development is
I know,
just CCCL as is. So it's, again, it's not a new challenge. It's more of how are we gonna deal with this into the future as these redevelopments happen.
And
It's
it would-
something that we're dealing with right now in unincorporated county because we're starting to see the same things happening there that we're seeing in both Tequesta. A lot of probable development is gonna be happening, redevelopment is gonna be happening out there, and that's one of my roles is saying, hey, if we can draw back, great, but it's very difficult.
Right, which is where
In a
like grant
property
money
rights
you're
sense,
having.
to tell people, this was already here, you have to pull back.
Yeah, and I think that it would make sense because I hear from a lot of the residents wondering what happened to the beach? I just got back from being up north and there's no, that are curious. And it does seem, even when you look from an overview, there's always less beach in front of the hard armored buildings or usually the seawalls and the hard armoring.
Seawalls tend to accelerate erosion during storm events. So, when a wave's coming up and it hits a hard structure, it has nowhere to go but sink and then carry the material out with it. So you'll see accelerated erosion, and then the process to get that sand back up on the beach is regular, smaller waves and wind, and that just takes time.
Right.
But when it's going away quicker, it takes more time to get it back, so.
And I mean, to me, that's just also like Newton's laws. Like it's going to reflect with the same force that it hits,
Yes.
essentially, and it pulls everything offshore with
Yeah.
it. Right? So, yeah, okay. So there's nothing. I mean, it would be nice. Is there anything that could be done to help kind of incentivize those developers, or like educate? Is there anything? I guess is it from a state level or?
I think the state level is where it's starting to emerge. And I think it's gonna continue to happen because it's a similar situation throughout the state.
Right.
Local municipalities have their own ability to control to a certain extent, but you run into property rights, which trump a lot of things in a
Well,
lot of
and you have,
senses, which is tough.
county commissioners that say uniformity is the name of the game, so they like to not enforce more than I think that that's an overlooked, ability of municipalities, that they can strengthen the laws as they may seem fit for the area, but you can't lessen them any, right? I mean, of course.
Yes, you definitely can't lessen state rules or laws. You can strengthen them in certain senses, but you even see challenges on that front.
Right. And then I had one more. You had said that we have an opt-out program here in Tequesta that's a
Yes.
little different than the one. I was just curious what the differences are and if there's anything
It's-
that we can do to improve what we've got going on
It's
here.
very similar. So the county has a model sea turtle lighting ordinance. And our goal, and in the past, the county handled sea turtle lighting enforcement in the Tequesta area. Jay may have more of a sense of this than I do, but it's run not through my program, but a sister program that works right next to me. Tequesta opted out within the last year or two to run their own program, but working closely with our staff to make sure that we're all on the same page. So it's really the same conditions that are in place. It's just run through, I believe, Tequesta Code Enforcement, and I know that we've had several meetings between Tequesta staff and our turtle staff to make sure that we're on the same page, to try to, lighting's one of the most important things as you get into nesting season, to make sure it gets done right. So we've had a number of meetings to make sure that they're looking at things the same way we would. The way the county's ordinance is local municipalities can opt out and have their own program as long as it's as strong or stronger than the county's
Right,
program.
of course.
The county's very attentive to its program. We do a good job enforcing it. And some of the challenges we have usually with other municipalities south of here, So it's just important that we continue to work with the village and
Are-
their staff to make sure it's being enforced.
Are we able to see like what the enforcement, how many, citations were written in previous years when the county was handling it, just to make sure that that
I'm
we're
sure that-
doing as well as you
I'm
guys
sure that
did?
we have that data.
I would
for-
love to see that.
For prior years, and then, yeah, it would be up to you folks to figure out what's going
Right,
on.
no, I understand. I would love to see just what it was.
But yeah, that goes back to one of the earlier environmental slides that I had, that's, a critical, important thing that we handle a little bit separately from my program, but again, the sea turtle lighting program.
Mhm.
Turtles, for whatever reason, can't see the red lights. So you switch to a different kind of lighting, but there's all sorts of different lighting structures and lighting, specific wavelengths that are acceptable to turtles. All that has to go through review at either the county level or at the municipal level to make sure that on the coast it's getting done right for sea turtle nesting season.
Is that the Marriott scenario?
I believe so. There's a lot of problems on Singer Island, but our staff works very hard to make sure it gets done right, and that was one of the success stories.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, yes, I would love to see, just in terms of that regulation over the years, because I know that enforcement has kind of been an issue here in Tequesta. So I would hope
And
that.
it's not unique, that's.
Right.
But again, we have bigger
I just-
challenges on the lighting side.
Right,
where-
and to take that on ourselves when we already have enforcement challenges. I wasn't aware that in the past few years we switched over to that, so okay, well,
Building code did just buy an ATV to start monitoring it.
who did?
The building department has an ATV to go out and monitor. We are without a code officer currently though, but.
So can anybody ride on the beach? We can just now ride on the beach?
Regulatory people.
You would have to have the ability to get access to the beach, and you'd have to have approvals from the state.
Right.
During sea turtle season. But again, that's something that I'm sure that's been worked out with our sea turtle staff to make sure that they're doing it as our folks would do it.
Okay. Are we saving money on that? Is that like a,
It's not my department, the
Right.
building department, but I
Okay.
know that they got.
do we pay, obviously, the municipalities pay to have you enforce and monitor that? Is that why we would have opted out?
I don't believe so.
So then why would we have opted out?
It's not his thing, so
It's called local control.
Uh-huh.
I'll have building.
I'll chalk it up to politics, but,
I hear you.
Good amongst on here.
but, we can definitely get you info from.
He
the
doesn't
county
seem
side.
those nervous. I hear you. He's fine. All right, well, thank you. I think those are all of my questions. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you very much,
Anybody
Andy.
else? We
You guys
good?
wanna ask- I think Jill is on Zoom.
Oh, yeah,
Jill, can you
Jill.
hear us?
I saw her. She was. Yeah.
Jill, can you hear us? I think she's no longer on, I'm sorry. Can I get one quick question in from staff?
Yeah, of course.
So you did mention that the reefs help to prevent maybe the shore break from pounding the shores hard and leading more erosion. If, let's say, a nonprofit or some type of group wanted to create or enhance the existing reef system with like reef balls or something like that, would that help, and would that be difficult to achieve?
Very difficult to achieve. Helpfulness, questionable. Reef balls, we're not a big fan of. So we've, again, had a lot of interest from nonprofits and private entities saying we have the silver bullet. We can put out and a lot of, engineered concrete structures. We've looked at almost all of them and said they're too light. They'll get torn up in a storm. They'll end up on the natural reef and cause more problems than they're worth. Really, to be effective in an erosion sense, you need those big hairy boulders. You need big rock. And to do that, you're in the same permitting situation as jetties, groins, or breakwaters. We've looked at even on the side, can we build artificial reefs that have an ancillary benefit of holding sand? That's possible, but you have to be very careful, because if they do too well, then you're in the same situation of worrying about downdrift, number one. And number two, artificial reef placement in Palm Beach County is tremendously difficult right now. We've done it in the past, basically within a mile or so of shore as mitigation reef for these large beach nourishments. We've had to build like reef. You'll see that offshore of the Coral Cove area. In this image, you can see a little bit of it on the very eastern side. On the left-hand side, there's some artificial reef that we built as part of our Jupiter-Carlin project mitigation and Juno project mitigation. There's boulders out there. They've been a little bit scattered by storms. They're still generally in good shape. But what's happened over the past 10 years is it's gotten much more difficult on the federal side to place that, because the conditions due to the regulatory environment have just shot through the roof of, you're putting something out there, how's it gonna hurt, you know, baby turtles? How's it gonna hurt adult turtles? How's it gonna hurt fisheries? So there's a ton of study that goes into it. We're still trying to get back into placing nearshore reefs, but it's very difficult. One of the other issues we have is just the geology of our area. We have that nearshore Anastasia layer. Right at the eastern edge of it, it drops off, and it's a deep sand well. So you're limited to placing this rock where you have a thin veneer of sand where it can be supported by some underlying rock structure so it doesn't sink. So you can't place it offshore where there's near shore underlying structure, it'll sink. And if you place it too close to near shore, then it's potentially impacting reefs. So it's tremendously difficult in a regulatory sense. I would say it almost wouldn't happen here because of all the hard bottom. But it's tough, and we're working on it. But we get a lot of outreach there, and we're very cautious of that, because there's been a couple of unscrupulous groups out there hitting politicians lately of, hey, we can solve this, we can place reefs and grow coral reefs, and it sounds all great until you realize they're placing lighter concrete structures that'll get tossed around in regular storms that we do have. And we're more concerned about the reefs that are there and making sure that they stay in good shape. So we're very closely clued into all that. We want to make sure it's done right, and a lot of the things we've seen recently are more of silver bullet sales pitches that we know enough to know better are not going to work.
Was somebody from the county at the South Florida Ecosystem Task Force Restoration meeting recently down in the down at the Miccosukee Casino?
What was the topic?
It was everybody from DC down. It was I mean, South Florida management everybody kind of covered just South Florida's ecosystem restoration.
Don't know.
And there was a lot. I learned about the reforming event, or the event last year that basically killed all of the lower.
If there was a reef component, we probably had someone there, because we're very engaged on reefs and the
they
thermal
definitely.
issue, and we've been monitoring our reefs closely to make sure that that's not creeping up into our area as much as it is the south.
Well, it sounds like our area is the only one that still has a portion of living reef in North America, because basically
We're fortunate
Broward
because
south.
we have the Gulf Stream that
Yeah.
really moderates our temperatures, so we don't get that, you know, when there is coastal warming during various periods of, you know, different weather activity, we're very stable. It's the same reason people move here. It's nice in the winter and it's cool during the summer, because the Gulf Stream is so consistent just offshore of us, and it also protects our reefs in a lot of ways.
Yeah, well, and
But we have had some die-off events that are, we've seen warmer temperatures. I know our reef folks will say warmer than normal, but we've also had disease-related issues. So there's a lot going on in the reefs that they're looking at very closely, trying to figure out what the cause is.
Well, and then again, but they're going to be doing the implementations to the Loxahatchee River. It sounds like the Army Corps is adding 7 additional projects onto it, and they're going to be trying to reroute the water from Okeechobee north so that they don't have the problems they're having south. But that water coming in here and then going out our inlet is going to become a problem also, I would think.
I would doubt it would come through the Loxahatchee, because it's got additional protections, and it's not an easy route for the
This is what I thought. I mean,
It's not an easy route for the drainage water, because most of the drainage that comes out of the Loxahatchee is through the C-18 that's fed by various natural areas. And it's not as direct. We have a big concern about that for the Lake Worth Lagoon.
Well, I
because
have
it's
a-
very direct for the
yeah.
Lake Worth Lagoon. We've got direct canals from the lake to the Lake Worth Lagoon. But it's something that we're very engaged on as a department.
Well,
that's
okay.
for sure.
Mindy Parrott, I believe, was the one that gave the presentation on that at the ecosystem talk about a restoration meeting. But I was curious to get some more information on what projects they had lined up for that, because again, there's 7 additional projects in addition to the 3 that they have currently that the Army Corps has presented at that meeting to show that they're starting on the Loxahatchee. And that was very nervous. I was scared. I've lived on the Loxahatchee over 35 years, so I've seen the decline. I know the seagrass isn't there that it used to be, and I don't see the manatees or the I don't see a lot of what I saw as a kid. And, I think that, but we don't have any of the issue. We don't have nearly the issues they have, obviously, farther north. And so the water quality is a major concern, which would, because of our title change with this permanently opened inlet, that obviously I would assume would affect whatever offshore, just like the salinity affects inshore when it switches to an incoming, and I wasn't sure if there was any concern with that with the reefs. But just in hearing about the coral reefs, that's something I think as a community we should be educating more or trying to make our residents more aware of having offshore, because I think that that's something we have, a responsibility to protect here. And so, anything that we could do or you would advise that we do with residents or educate them on, I would be happy to help with that. And as somebody that goes out and does the public engagement at our food truck events and things like that, I'm always looking for educational material to show them, to make them proud of their area and get them excited and want to help it. So, again, any resources that you have about the reefs, I'm always interested in hearing.
We do have a number of resources about natural and artificial reefs that are just offshore area that are great.
Okay.
Again, ecotourism, locations for residents and everybody. So.
Great.
But also protecting them is critical importance. So.
Yes. Well, we want to help with that. So, thank you.
Thank you,
I think this was
Andy.
a great wonderful presentation.
Well, again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate these opportunities more than anything else, because I get to engage with you and see what your issues are and make sure that we're on top of the same issues, because I know we have the same concerns. So, thank you again. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And feel free to reach out. Jay's got my contact info, and I'm sure we'll be in touch on whatever we need to be.
And you have a copy of the slides you said?
I'll send slides to you guys with Andy's contact info.
Great, thank you. All
All right.
right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. All right, so moving on to the consent agenda. Right, do we need to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the May 8th, 2024 EAC meeting.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Do we have to wait for her? Is it okay that Michelle isn't here?
You got 4 votes.
Okay. All right, then we're all in favor. Okay, so now moving on to the regular agenda. We have no old business to address. New business. We have, I'm the first presenter, I'm the first presenter, thank you, I know, I didn't have a chance to pull it up here. First presenter here. So I have an update from Peter Dewitt on the Gelona area that is on the north side of Beach Road, heading over. The kiosks are in, I don't know if I had mentioned, but there were the 2 Eagle Scouts, or a couple Eagle Scouts that had taken on the task of creating trails on that north portion of the property there, with the hopes that towards the end of the month we might be able to have some sort of a ribbon cutting ceremony, because we've got kiosks in, they're waiting on the maps, they're waiting on the bike racks to get installed, which should happen in the next couple of weeks. And once that's all in place, they just have to remove the portion of the fence that runs along US 1 closest to TD Bank, so that residents can enter the trails from that side.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought it would be a great opportunity. I forget what month this is, it's National Outdoor Month or something like this. It fits in well, but if to Cuesta we were to have a somewhat of a ribbon cutting ceremony, or kind of an event where I think it would be nice if any of us that are available could attend. And if we have kids that we wanted to bring, or whatever, but this is an exciting addition from the BLM that I think is wonderful for local residents. So,
But we don't know the date yet.
we don't have a date yet, just because they're installing those things, and I know that Peter is working with, he'd reached out to our mayor, but once we do have a date, I will forward it along, and, whatever efforts we can make to be there for that, I think would be nice. Okay, so that's, any questions on that? Okay.
So is he gonna get a driveway or a roadway cut has he got an approval from DOT to allow that? An access point with the,
There's no driving, it's just walking in.
all walking only?
It's like from
Okay.
the sidewalk on US 1, the fence would be out, you know,
Yeah.
and I think it's just an entry. If you want to drive and park, there is the existing parking on the north, you know, on that other entrance
Yeah.
area.
Okay.
So, yeah, from my understanding, there's no
So
additional
it's
parking.
pedestrian only sort of
Mhm.
thing, okay.
Yes. And I think, Michelle, you might have been, we have the kiosk in and we're waiting on the maps and the bike racks to get installed. And then once those are in place, they just have to cut the fence portion. So,
Nice.
yes. Okay, and then the next item we have here is to review and consider our recommendations to council regarding the current tree policy. For those of you that might have read the memo on this, we had an incident in Tequesta where 200-plus-year-old eucalyptus were cut down. And it created quite a stir with residents in the area, wondering how it had gotten approved, and it hadn't been approved. There was no permitting for it, which kind of opened a lot of concerns. And then looking into the policy that is in place, I think that we need to review our current tree policy. We have, I think it was 23 or 27 prohibited plants to the 9 that are in Palm Beaches. And I'm not sure how we've gotten all of those on there, or how we decided which plants to prohibit, because there's been concern from residents that some of the plants on our list are not prohibited species with the state. And so, I mean, you know, or for example, the banyan tree. A banyan tree is a prohibited tree. So in the neighborhood I've grown up in off of Point Drive, we've got the banyan tree park that the village has. So there are 2 different designations for protecting trees that are on the prohibited tree list. If they're a species or a historic tree, and so I didn't know if we needed to look into which trees around the village might be considered historic trees to implement protections for those, so that, you know, obviously those are protected. But I do think that we need to address the policy, because, you know, one of my concerns was, are we required to plant, if we take out a mature tree, do we have to replace with the mature tree? And I think that, were those, that all I think was changed in the past couple of years also, right? Wasn't the tree policy, it said,
They updated it in January of 2023.
Right.
When they did the beach road design guidelines, they updated the landscape code, and I think went to more Florida-friendly landscaping, but I don't know the full story. Steve Parker, the village landscape architect, has been out of town and just got back, so I can follow up with him, or I can have him come and, you know, provide some
Right.
information about this.
and Thomas, you were chair, I believe then, right? Were we aware of the updated landscape changes, do you know?
In January 23, I remember them doing something about it, but I don't think the list changed radically at all. My
They
recollection.
added the 5, it already had like 22 or 21, and they added 5 or 6 to it.
Additional prohibited species?
So eucalyptus was one of the ones that was added in
Oh.
that 2023.
Okay.
Because it's not considered Florida friendly or native, right? So, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can just go and clear cut eucalyptus. It's existing. It just means that moving forward, the village would prefer people to plant, you know, native trees rather than eucalyptus, Australian pine, you know, trees like that.
Oh, yeah, well, and certainly Australian pine, because,
That's-
okay,
That's banned anyway through the state.
yes, yes.
So,
Were those trees on private property?
They were on the HOA, they were on the Bay Harbor HOA property, yes, they were. And so that HOA has received a fine, although they didn't agree to they didn't agree to participate in the tree cutting. So, you know, that I think is another something that whether this is on our shoulders, but, if we wanted to let HOAs know, I know that the Bay Harbor HOA, for example, was not aware that they were the ones that were supposed to be pulling a permit for an individual, or, we might, once we get, if we are able to review the policy and see if we have any changes that we would like to recommend or point out to the council, it might behoove the village to just send something out to HOAs even, and let them know what the policy is, and that falls on them, because since that 2 trees coming down, since that it had been brought to my attention that there were at least 15 others in that neighborhood that had been taken down.
Eucalyptus.
No,
Oh,
no,
other
on the properties, like a recently sold Bay Harbor property that had, I guess, 9 trees on it that have been removed. Another property down the road, 21 Bay Harbor, that had trees on it that has been removed. And
Those are
so,
private properties. People have property rights to put their own trees on there?
No.
no,
The,
How do you work with that?
I wanted to add, if I could ask Jay a question. Jay, when I was manager, we had a code that basically said for every, let's just use single family as an example. For every new single family home, they had to come up with a tree plan. And so sometimes a lot will have existing vegetation on it, and basically any tree that had a, trunk of a 3-inch diameter trunk had to be on the plan to show building staff where those were located, and if they wanted to cut any of those 3-inch diameter or greater down, they had to indicate why they had to do that. I don't see that in the code anymore.
Yeah, I don't love the tree code either. I've worked with some other ones in the past that have been really good, and that even specifically tell you what you have to mitigate, right? Ours just, it doesn't tell you, so I've worked in a city where it's like, you've got to mitigate, for every inch you take out for this type of tree, you have to mitigate 2 inches. Ours is
not strong.
not very specific on things, so
We need to look at it.
there's
Yeah.
definitely a few things that we could look at. It's a long-term project. I know of a couple pretty good examples we can use as a starting point.
That's good, yeah.
Actually, I happen to have worked in the city called Atlantic Beach up in Jacksonville. Beautiful old oak tree canopy, was developed in 1910. And so they have extremely stringent tree code, a very well-written tree code, and I can almost just take that and start tinkering, adding it into our code, and, there's some things it's pretty stringent in some areas, so there's some things we might want to loosen up, because it's tough, from a personal property rights perspective, it's tough. We had challenges all the time where people say, hey, I planted this tree 5 years ago, and now you're gonna penalize me for taking this tree that I paid for. So, there's some complications to it, but I would like to.
Well, if you could maybe forward that to us, yeah, that would be great. And if you can forward it to, so we could review it even, and then, as you implement it or integrate, maybe, I know that sometimes we can see the revisions or the changes. When we were doing the comprehensive plan, Tom, how you would strike, or you would show in red what changes would be made.
Yeah.
That would be nice, so we could see,
Well, yeah, why don't you, so you have some examples in your mind that you think might be beneficial for Tequesta, right?
What I'll do, unfortunately, I'm finishing up the living shoreline stuff. We've got our commercial code, so it's not something I can get to immediately, but it's something within 3 to 6 months I can hopefully have, and have a draft code that I can workshop with.
I was thinking that,
council.
for starters, you just send us copies of that
Yeah,
code.
exactly, and we can
Let us
start-
look at it.
yeah.
Then we can come back at a future meeting and all of us, opine on what's good or bad in it.
And
Come
help
up
you
with-
do some of your work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can see
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
No, I'll send you guys that code. It's good.
Historically, what I remember was about 40 years ago, somewhere in that time frame, this part of Florida became very concerned about Australian pines because they're two things. Their root structure was very weak, and they would take off into space when a hurricane hit. But then they've learned that the pine, what do you call them?
Cones?
Not the pine cones, the
The needles?
pine needles. The pine needles would fall and they create a gas that basically kills all vegetation around them. And so that wasn't good. So and then the third thing was they spread like weeds. So that was a problem. So the codes started to make changes across, particularly South Florida. And then about that same time, South Florida Water Management District got involved because of melaleuca trees. They saw that they were just growing like weeds throughout their properties, but they had another problem with them, was that the melaleucas are just soaking up water right out of the aquifer. I mean, they're just massive water consumers. And so that began the process of counties and cities following the lead of South Florida Water Management District relative to which kinds of trees and plants should we prohibit because they're invasive or they have other problems. So when I read this, I went to the South Florida Management District website, and I cannot find their list. I believe that the original source of these prohibited invasive plants and trees came originally from South Florida Water Management District in this area.
It did, and then UF has taken it on. So UF has a list of invasive plants, and I think that has become kind of the standard in Florida.
Okay.
So a lot of municipal codes will even say, we just defer to the Florida invasive species list managed by UF, because that's constantly evolving. That way you don't have to update your own code every 2 years as that updates. So that's something we can look at, and I'll send that out to the.
Yeah, so we could look at that and think, and then all of us opine, right, about what's applicable for regulation here or not to be regulated, whatever,
And I think too,
prohibited.
yeah, and a lot of that too, when you look at the community, I mean, I think that you've got a lot of homeowners that they're able to do these. They're able to take the tree out, they're probably able to replant or things like that.
Yeah.
We're not creating too much of a burden, on, I think this is an area we can create some stricter regulations comfortably.
You dump the data on us and we'll
Yeah.
we'll
Because again, residents were, I had neighbors calling the police. I mean, that was a big one, the trees coming down. The bigger issue though too is a safety concern in my opinion, because as I had expressed, there were kids that were playing on the Banyan Tree Park area while the cutting was happening, and they hadn't prevented, there wasn't any sort of safety measures in place, and the kids at one point hit a wiffle ball over and were running over to get it, and I had to stop. I'm like, whoa, we can't go get that. So when the police, when people were coming, it was, I think, again, to the company, which we've looked at when we first started this, but there were, 6 licensed landscaping companies in Tequesta registered to operate.
When we receive this data from Jay, maybe one of the things you could do is, if it seems like it's a lot, be thinking of how to divvy up the load when we have an EAC meeting.
Okay, yeah. And I think that when you took on a bulk of, obviously, the helping with the comprehensive plan when we were reviewing that, but that process seemed to work well, that when whoever was making revisions would make them in red so we could see what changes we were suggesting and then decide upon it together as a council.
That's right.
So yes, I definitely think that.
So was there any, I thought there was something else. So we want to look at our list relative to, say, the UF and see, probably going to be a longer list than what even we have, and see what's applicable in our opinions for Tequesta. But
also the regulations in terms of removing and replanting. We need to look at what our policy is in general.
That's right. That's the tree ordinance piece. There was something else about, I remember in the code, so it says, you can have a specimen tree and you can have a historic tree. And all it says, and I'm going from memory because I've been out of town a while, it says something like, these designations have to be approved by the planning and zoning, and then,
The village council.
I don't think it said, maybe,
It did.
but it doesn't, that's it. Does, how does one become a specimen tree versus a historic, I mean,
Yeah, I
There's
asked
no-
Lance about it, and he said they don't even have a list of anything.
Right. So
So-
are there any, we don't even, so there are no currently
We can
designated
double check
specimens?
with Lori, but he said that community development doesn't have a list of them, which tells me that none have ever been designated.
Right. And that's what I was assuming, I mean, I was kind of presuming that was the case, and, again, I don't know if that's something we would wanna reach out to neighborhoods or to how we wouldn't wanna necessarily go about that, because I'm sure there are people that would feel like they have trees that are worth a historic designation and others may not, but I think you mentioned, which I agree with, if something's over a certain age, it should have protection in place.
Yeah, so when you look at the Atlantic Beach Code that I'll send, we designated, I believe it was anything over 30 inches of certain species was called like a specimen tree, and those had special protections,
Mhm.
but then you could also personally designate a tree, I think it had to be larger than that. You could designate it as a heritage tree,
Oh,
and that was the property owner had to initiate it. But we would give them, I think, we did something to kind of incentivize people to do it, because like,
Mhm.
right, why would someone come in and do that? So it was
Mhm.
like a no-fee thing, and then I think we gave them like a plaque every time they did it,
Mhm,
and
that's
gave
cool.
them recognition.
yeah,
And a few people actually came forward at 45-inch caliper
Yeah.
oaks that were 80 years old, and they came in and designated them, because they said, hey, if my property ever sells, if I pass away and my property
Yes.
is inherited, I don't want this tree to ever come down.
I hear you.
So there's some stuff in that code, you guys.
I mean, I have at least 4 huge oak trees on my father's property, 4 huge pine trees that have been there, so they're big, big trees, and I could understand that, people wanting, because the air doesn't care, like I've said, the air doesn't care if it's an invasive plant or not, the habitat that's being provided, it's home and the air that's getting cleaned by the trees, I think, that's what's important. So anyway, we would love to review and compare, the tree policy that you're suggesting, Atlantic Beach and wherever else, to what we have.
If I may say something?
Yeah. Sure, Marcia?
I'd just be a little careful about this, because you have property rights. And if I put a tree in, I'm not gonna be happy at all if I can't take that tree out.
I know, this is, I thank you, I
So,
understand.
take a look at what happened with the artificial turf.
Well, that's artificial though, this is a
I
tree.
mean, people are, like you say, so I sell a house and I don't want that tree.
I understand, but it's not always, again, the trees impact the
So if you're gonna
community and
do
the air
this,
quality for
I would
everybody.
be- Yeah, that's all fine and dandy and it's lovely, but
Do have to look at that.
you're gonna get some problems unless you're really, really open about this, unless you're really, really, if you try to force this down people's heads, it's not gonna be pretty.
I think though residents, you're the first I've actually met that has objected, but I think most residents are very,
I would
accepting
totally
of
disagree with
trees. Okay, I hear you, I understand, and we have different,
And to Marcia's point too, a lot, other than that heritage designation I mentioned, you can always take the tree out, it's just that you typically
have to replant, yeah.
That's it. But it's been a while since I've looked at that code, but I believe we had something in there where if you planted the tree yourself and it was under a certain age, you wouldn't have to get penalized for it.
But I don't think people know this, because my neighbor was thinking about taking an oak out, and we did talk him out of it, but this never came up. So people don't know
yeah.
that if I take my oak tree out, I'm gonna have to get a permit. They don't
And
know
I guess,
that.
and so we, basically, my father's HOA has now incurred fines for trees they had no idea were even
Well,
coming
see,
out.
that's a problem.
Big
You don't
problem.
Let people know.
Right, this is what I'm saying, so again, we need to, I think either reach out to all of the HOAs or I don't know how we would recommend doing this, but I think that if we're gonna be a Tree City USA, and we're gonna strengthen this code, then we need to make sure that people are aware of it, so that they're not blindsided.
am I wrong, but I thought There was an article in Smoke Signals recently.
I mean, that was just after the eucalyptus. That was because of the eucalyptus coming out.
I don't think that was in Spoke Signals, but it went in the weekly.
Yeah,
The Weekly
yeah.
Friday, yeah, okay.
Right, that, you're talking recently though, like the last one, right?
Yeah.
Or yes,
Yeah.
one or two, right. Well, I had suggested, my PR side in me was assuming that most people would think the village had cut down those eucalyptus, and so I had said it might be proactive on our end if we reminded people that there is a policy and there are permits needed, and we might want to put that out there. So I was happy to see that they did include something, because again, there seems to be a lack of awareness of what the policy is.
You might want to reach out to people like Only Trees too, because they never mentioned it.
And this is the problem back to when we're finding out there's only 6 registered landscapers in the village, and
Yeah, there's way more than that.
we were saying, like, you could see 6 in our neighborhood, 6 different landscaping companies in one neighborhood,
And
so.
to that point, with the tremendous amount of landscapers that are using glyphosate, the Roundup,
Yeah,
and, I mentioned something to one of the ones in our neighborhood, and I said, you can't use that. And they just walk away like, it's hard to enforce, obviously, but that might be something we need to look at in terms of the approved licensed landscape companies, and that's one of something
Yeah,
to look
trees
at.
can be dangerous, is why there's permits involved relative to cutting them down. Like, for example, Jessica was just saying that children were playing wiffle ball where their men are cutting down, 30, 40-foot eucalyptus tree? That's kind of dangerous. But, speaking for myself, if there's a vacant lot and a person wants to build a home on it, I feel like they should be able to do anything except they can't put in vases and they can't put in noxious plants, period. That's simple. But when there's an existing piece of property with or without a home, and they want to start cutting down trees, well, if they're specimen or historic, well, that's a whole different ballgame. But even then, if they meet certain criteria, like you get an arborist to tell you this is rotting within and it's going to fall over, then you can take it down. Palm Beach does, the government, the city, this town, goes around and says that's a historic tree and it's hereby designated and you can't touch it. Property owner can't do anything about it. And some of you were wondering, why does Palm Beach have only 9 trees on its list or plants, The reason is because wealthy people want very exotic plants, and they don't, every time over the course of 20-something years, every time we wanted to upgrade the list, they said, get out of here, we're not touching it. They want to be able to do what they want to do. That's the only reason it's short.
well, when, there was actually a resident that's technically in Jupiter, but that saw our agenda and reached out to me because of the trees on Riverside Drive that are disappearing. So for example, I received these images that show this is the before and this is with the construction.
Yeah, see, that shouldn't be allowed.
So, I think that to this same notion, when we get our tree policy, it would almost be nice to reach out to Jupiter and see what they have in place, because Riverside Drive is like one of the entrances into Tequesta. And, when you're ripping out every single tree on
Churches.
properties, it is really affecting the habitat and the air, all of the different things that it helps environmentally, but also the aesthetics and what it looks like too,
That is the new aesthetic.
Well, it's, yeah, I hear ya.
What is?
That's the new aesthetic for the new homes that are very modern and minimalist and barren to landscape.
Modern and clean.
Yeah, no landscape, yeah, it's like property line to property line, as far as we can get with little room for anything, and certainly no roots.
They don't even have hedges?
They do, they just added in,
Hedges on those.
they just added them in around the property, but again, there were Jupiter residents that are frustrated and they were wondering if we had addressed that with Jupiter. So,
We can reach out to them as we're working through this.
I mean, I do think that, again, it's just, that's such a wonderful biking street, and I think so many of our residents enjoy that. And we're obviously putting in trees to add shade and create that walkable community that we all love. And so it seems counterproductive what they're doing there on Riverside with those.
So can someone reiterate exactly what we're gonna do so we'll know what's coming when it's in our inbox or whatever?
I mean, well, Jay is going to, are you gonna send it to us, or should we look for the Atlantic Beach on
No,
our?
I'll send you guys, it'll be a PDF or Word document of that tree code. I'll try and give a brief summary of it.
And yeah, you don't even have, you can, even if you
I'll
just,
I'll just send it to you guys, and then next week I'll start, actually I have some time, I can start sorting through it a little bit.
and again, yeah. we
And
were-
then next meeting, if you wanna just have it as an open workshop and continue
Yep.
the discussion.
I think so we'll all just review it and see what changes we think we would like to add to our code. We have the existing code that I included at the 2 links, I believe, in the backup, that we can review ourselves, and then when he gets the comparable but stricter tree policies out to us, we can look at those, and then at the next meeting.
What about the UF list?
I'll send that too.
Okay.
It's just, it's a link.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, yes, and so
Okay.
in terms of reviewing the species, I would love to know what they added last year.
It's the last 5 or 6 that are on that list.
Okay.
So 21 through 27, but I can send you the updated ordinance as well.
Okay, that would be great. So I think just if we want to all bring back items to workshop at the next meeting on the tree policy, and then see how heavy it is in terms of content, because then if we need to divvy up, that would be the time I would assume to do it, right? We'll just kind of
Yes.
get a broad overview until the next meeting of whatever we're able to give out. And then Jay, I'm happy to, reach out on my end. They have an environmental action or environmental task force in Jupiter, but they only meet quarterly. So, I'm happy to reach out to them, but I do see that there's the staff liaison for them that is who I was thinking,
Alright.
we should probably touch base with about that and see,
Who is it, Jay?
Barrett Cruz, is that who it is?
I think so, yes. Let me
They have
double
2 environmental people on staff, they have Barrett and Gretchen.
It was,
So are you suggesting letting them know we're not happy that they let their people cut trees?
well, I
down?
think asking first what their policy is that we've had, I obviously suggested to the Jupiter resident that lives off of Seabrook to reach out to Jupiter and let them know that they weren't happy with the trees. Yeah, it's Barrett Cruz, the Natural Resources Supervisor and Staff Liaison. So, and to reach out to their town council, but I think that if they don't have I don't know what they do have in place, but we could,
Do you have a photo of this barren landscape on Riverside Drive?
yeah,
Okay.
Before and after.
yeah, we have the before, that's what I was showing, I mean, it's that
Yeah,
to
yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah, there's only, and this one's taken out, this has since been taken out, the circle, since that picture.
This is where these are the 2 lots, right,
Yes,
with the big
yes.
McMansions?
Yes, exactly, that used to look like.
Yeah.
Maybe a letter to, I don't know if it's the EAC, their EAC,
Right.
or is it their council that gets a letter?
Let's do that.
says-
If you write Barrett, and then I will write the chair of their task force, and he can reach out to Barrett, maybe?
Well, should we let them know that we'd like to work together to
Yes.
improve our code along with them so that we have continuity in our communities where they intermingle?
I would
blah, blah,
certainly,
blah?
I mean, that's the goal here, yes. I was trying to just first see if they were even aware of it, if what was happening, and if they had taken measures already, then I don't want to offend anybody, but I was just going to say, we've had some concerns as we see the development along Riverside Drive and are curious what their policy is as we update ours. And,
So you-
are there requirements to put trees back in for those lots?
Yeah, some cities have where you can pay into a mitigation fund, so in
Ah.
a case like that, they can stroke a check for $30,000 and say,
Ah.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, I would like to know, again, if they did, and then what does the fund go towards?
it has to go towards
Salaries.
tree mitigation somewhere else.
Right, I did exactly.
What is it?
Salaries.
No, it's supposed to go towards
Oh,
mitigation in the
gosh.
right of way or parks, but yeah, it's never gonna
Right.
be like for like, because you have a hole with no trees, so.
Mhm. Right.
Okay, so Jessica's gonna do
I'm gonna reach out to the task force
the
chair.
task force,
And he's gonna reach out to Barrett Cruz.
and J to Barrett Cruz, okay.
Yes, because I'm not sure when they meet next. Which leads us to our next agenda item here quickly. That is our quarterly update with the council. Were you doing that, Jay, or was I? I can't.
You can do it.
Okay, again, we have July, so we have this meeting and then next meeting to discuss what items we would like to present or bring up with the council for our quarterly update at their workshop. And so I think that if we want to discuss those, maybe if we want to all come up with something that or we don't have to, but if everybody wanted to come up with a point or what they think they would like to see presented, we could discuss what those are at the next meeting.
Do we have time? When?
Well, it'll be right before. I mean, it's the day before,
No, it's the.
you're right, it's the
meeting's
29th, you said, yeah. So it's after the actual council meeting, which is the day after our meeting next month.
So the 29th would be a workshop?
Workshop, and you guys meet July 10th.
Okay, all right.
Right. So, I certainly think that just some of these items that we've discussed today are worth making sure that are on the council's radar. So I don't think that there's a question of whether or not we want to present to them. Obviously, we have things that we do. It's just what we want to present.
So it's been about 15 months since I did the last one. And I remember about a year ago, 12 months, Jeremy said, Tom, you want to do another quarterly update to the council? I said, no, because we haven't done anything except work on the comp plan. And so, and of course, that was an overstatement on my part, but obviously we completed the comp plan assignment that they originally gave us. And they're aware of it, that's something we should tell them. And I'd have to go through the agenda to see what all we dealt with, but it's definitely been about March or April of 2023 was the last time they got an update from
Okay.
us. So if we look at all the old agendas, if that's proper, agenda, we can see the subject matter.
Right. Okay.
And then, I'll probably do that on my own when I get home, and then I'll have,
Well, if you wanted to review what things since your last update, you would present and let me know, I think.
Jay, I have a recollection that Jeremy wanted me to write up a memo that they would have so they could see it before they actually came to the meeting.
I believe so. Jeremy's out right now, but I'll confirm with him and I'll let Jessica know. Or when I send my email out to you guys tomorrow, I'll let you know.
Okay. And then, something too, I would like for the council and us to be aware of what's going on with this Loxahatchee River, with what the Army Corps has planned for it. So whether we get a presentation or they get a presentation, but I think somebody needs to know what the heck is going on with the river.
And what?
Well,
I'm
I've
totally
had,
oblivious to what you're thinking of. What's happening out there? Something-
well, in the last agenda, I had the slides from the task force meeting.
Oh, okay.
Remember, and it's the new, there's 3 projects they currently have, but they're starting 7 new projects. And I know he sounded surprised about the water, but I mean, unless I misheard, the water is, they're redirecting water north instead of south, because there's been such an issue south with water and having flooding south. With the tree islands down with the Miccosukee
You mean
and 3C.
they're sacrificing our need for fresh water
Yeah.
in the Loxahatchee?
Well, no, they think they're giving us fresh water. We don't want that fresh water because it's from Okeechobee. And so I made the public comment of, well, thank you for recognizing that there is an ecosystem restoration need. However,
Not that water.
we're not sure we want, unless the water quality has been improved, we don't have any of the issues that they have north of us. And like to the point that he just brought up, our river we are one of only 2 designated wild and scenic. We have strict protections in place that we need to make sure that they are, following and adhering to. So I worry when I hear, I don't know who's watching or regulating.
Is the
So,
Loxahatchee River District watching that?
you know, I've reached out to them,
Joe Chason.
and there's nobody rushing to present to us what's going on. I think that it's a lot easier for them to get things done when municipalities aren't involved necessarily, and it's Army Corps, so I don't even know what involvement or say we have.
As a city, no.
Right.
So can we reach out to have Loxahatchee River District come out?
Yeah, well,
Present
Mindy
us?
Parrott, I mean, I have reached out, and we can reach out again, you know, because again, perhaps
Isn't
if
that
it's.
Joe Chason?
No, we need, the woman that presented at the task force meeting was from the South Florida Water Management District, and her name is Mindy Parrott. And again, even if we were able, they just had one slide at the meeting, and they just were touching on, they said, you know, here, and I included it in the backup from our last agenda, but I would just like to have a little bit more detail on that slide.
So that was South Florida Water Management?
Mhm.
And what does Loxahatchee River District entity have over in power and control in relation to water that comes into our?
That's a very good question.
Right, and
They
this-
don't have any authority.
Right.
Okay.
They're a special
It's
district.
terrible.
They were a
Tax
special
District
district
4.
created totally for the collection and treatment of sanitary sewage.
Oh,
And so they have
Only.
expanded their mission to include
The river keeper.
monitoring the river and doing this and doing that.
And they have the Wild Pine Lab that they do, but it's mainly, again, water quality.
Yeah, they
right.
figured.
Sampling and, you know, but
Right. So,
Is there not a Loxahatchee River Keeper?
well, it's not the same, there's a river keeper, because I've been, the Water Keeper Organization, the Water Keeper Alliance, that's something that I have been Marty Baum, I had to get him to let go of the Loxahatchee as its own separate, because it was included with the Indian River. And so this is their River Keeper program, but it is not under the Water Keeper Alliance. They've just named their boats the River Keepers. So it's a little confusing, because I know there's the Water Keeper Alliance, which, so anyway, it's just their boat that takes the samplings from the different locations in the river.
is that a nonprofit?
Is that a government, it's under,
Who are the river keepers?
well, that's just under the that's just the name of the boat of the Wild Pine Labs.
The River Keepers Alliance, like, so there's a Lake
No,
Lagoon
no,
River
there's not,
Keepers,
but that's
River
something
Keepers.
I've been working on and have.
That's usually who's the primary
Right.
advocate for.
So
people.
I have been working, I've spoken with the headquarters in New York, and like I said, Marty Baum, when he was the Indian River Keeper, and has handed it over. Loxahatchee was included with the Indian River. And so it's been a process to get it separated, which I have, and then it's just a matter of starting that.
What about the Loxahatchee River Coordinating Council?
That's all, it's all the same, it's all kind of.
First.
Well, see, they have an FDEP staff person that's, see, that body is assigned the task of coming up with ways to reduce the nutrient load in the river, et cetera, and if it's not done by such and such a time, the state of Florida is gonna mandate Tequesta, Jupiter, Inlet Colony, all of them, to start doing, mandatory things to reduce nutrient loading as well as other problematic stuff. And so, if somebody's saying they're gonna send us nasty water to give
Right.
us fresh
That's
water,
nutrient
well, that's not
loading.
really gonna help with trying to separate the wheat from the chaff as to who's really causing the problem that's in the water, if they're adding more gunk to it aside from what we ourselves are producing.
And it says here on their website, the Loxahatchee River Management Coordinating Council advises the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the South Florida Water Management District on matters that affect administration of the Loxahatchee River, to identify and resolve intergovernmental coordination problems, and to enhance communications. So we would think that they might be, and furthermore, they're responsible for the development of the Loxahatchee River Management Plan.
Right. Is that got a staff person's name at FDEP?
At FDEP?
Yeah, because you see, they said that they report to FDEP, didn't it say?
It advises,
Advises.
it advises FDEP.
So if you find out what,
I see they have, their next meeting is June 20th. Well, that's a public hearing.
where is it?
Board meeting is June 20th, public hearing is June 20th.
Doesn't say where.
They have it, I think 2500 Jupiter Park Drive, but I don't know if that's where
That's
it
lots.
doesn't list here.
That's the Loxahatchee River's
Yes.
offices, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay, so they have it in that little chamber that the board meets in at that room.
mm-hmm. So there's a 5-minute public hearing, it's 6:55 to 7, and then after that, from 7 to 8 is their board meeting on June 20th. So,
Maybe a letter to them raising concern, we are focusing on this transference of fresh water from Lake Okeechobee to Loxahatchee River, right?
that's that, I mean, yes.
That's it, right?
Yes, I definitely, and if that's not happening, because again, Andy sounded like, oh, no, they're not gonna bring that water up here. But I just would like to make sure, I think that's something we should, we don't need the cyanospore gas, we don't need any of the stuff that they get from the.
If that's what he told you, he is speaking against what their plans say they are going to do.
Right, exactly. Which
So-
leads me to think that, again, and he wasn't even, it didn't immediately click the South Florida Ecosystem Task Force meeting, so I'm not sure that they had a representative there. And I didn't see or hear from anybody from the Loxahatchee River Environmental Control District or the Coordinating Council or whatever. So I was just concerned to be the only person.
Should we send them a letter, those people?
I mean, we certainly could, I think. And I think that, again, I haven't been able to get in contact, Mindy Parrott has not been responding.
Her last name is Parrott?
Parrott, Parrott, yep, Parrott. And-
Arg.
Yeah, right, so again,
What, is that an FDEP?
no, this is the Loxahatchee River Environmental Control District.
So you just Googled that, right?
I just, put in there, and it pulled up this page, the Management Coordinating Council.
I don't think, thinking out loud, I don't think we should be writing a letter to them as the EAC because it might conflict with opinions of some of our elected officials here in town, but we can write to them as an individual and say to them, we have concerns about the plan for, diverting dirty Okeechobee Lake water to the mouth, or whatever you call it, of the Loxahatchee River.
Sometimes it's easier if it comes from just Jeremy or I as staff, where we say our environmental committee is very concerned about this, can you come speak to us? In the same way I got Andy to come out, same way that Jeremy got, recycling to come out last meeting.
I like for them to come out because there's.
What?
I like for them to come out.
Yeah.
I do too.
Accountability,
Hold them
face to face.
accountable.
I did too.
Absolutely.
So they have staff members, I'm looking them up now, they have several staff members, so we could try and have one of them
I
come
mean,
out.
we get on their radars.
Now, I could be wrong, but Margie, I think, is our rep on that board, that council.
Maybe she's the one to reach out, okay.
All right.
Wouldn't their plans be public knowledge, or they'd have to be,
Just gotta figure out which.
like, they'd have to be in the public eye, wouldn't it?
You're talking
I
about
read
the
about it.
coordinating council?
Yeah.
Yes, they're open to the public. It's a public state creation to
But
bring
sometimes
all
things-
of us stakeholders, governments in the area to the table to come up with a comprehensive plan by such and such a date to reduce nutrient loading and pollution in the Loxahatchee River. So it is open to the public, and it was created by the state of Florida to avoid having to sue all of us for failure to clean up our drainage discharge into the Loxahatchee River and the basin that feeds
But,
it.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
But the plans that they have that you saw in that presentation, wouldn't that have to be publicly published information?
I did read it somewhere. It might have been the Palm Beach Post. I read about it.
When you,
a
I'm
couple
Like
weeks
an
ago.
official?
Yeah, I want to clarify, when we're referring to what Jessica read or saw or went to, was that, who exactly was that, Jessica?
That's what I was just pulling up
I
right
thought
now.
you said South Florida Water Management.
I'm almost positive that they're the ones that, that they did it, but I'm not sure, so I'm just double checking here. I put them in the last agenda, but I think that it was, yes.
Did you guys know that, that the Army Corps was actually sending water to Lake Worth Lagoon? So everyone knows it goes to St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee River. But they sent 500 cubic feet per second to Lake Worth Lagoon in February. And so.
Right. That's what he was concerned about. That's what he was just saying. That's the
thing,
huge
thing.
concern.
I don't know what it takes for them to be able to start doing that, right? I mean, I
Well-
think a lot of municipalities, Boynton Beach, West Palm Beach, Riviera, they're all probably taken off guard by that. So I think we should probably go on the offense here and,
Stay ahead of it.
you know,
Stay ahead of
be
it.
proactive and stay ahead of it and find out, rather than like, all of a sudden next year find out, hey, we're dumping water in too. You're
Yeah.
somehow it's added into their Army Corps plan, slipped into some little document
Right.
somewhere.
The C-51 canal exit.
Well, the
discharge.
problem again is that I've been down in the Everglades for the past year every month, and they're flooded. They've been drowning. So these meetings are called because their animals have no more tree islands to get up onto. So the problem has been in the 3C area, 3A or 3C of the management district south, which is north of Everglades National Park, but south of, us, and it's an area that is often overlooked. It's the Miccosukee tribal lands. And so they have been, for this past year, like really raising Cain about what's going on down there, and I think really forcing they're forcing them to look at alternative ways to make sure that that water isn't drowning them. And the solution, I guess, has been to push north.
So the odds are it was either the South Florida Water Management District or the Army Corps of Engineers you heard, went, or saw.
It's right here. It is the South Florida Water Management District.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
she
they're
was,
the ones that are implementing the plan for diversion of water to the Loxahatchee Slough to feed the Loxahatchee River, fresh water.
yeah.
But so, South Florida Water Management District is a governmental agency. They have been working on this particular plan for a long time. I don't know if it's been finalized, but,
Here it is.
gosh, how long ago? I retired in 2018. It was, they hadn't officially adopted it back then. So
Well, components 1, 2, and 6 are in design. Vegetation management, including biocontrol, survey, and geotech modeling underway.
for the
Components
restoring-
1, 2, and 6, which are Kitchen Creek, Moonshine, and the C-18 West Impoundment. There are Cypress Creek Canal, Gulfstream West, Palmar East, and then these other structures at Grassy Waters Triangle, a pump station, and 2 other structures.
C-18 impoundment?
That's what it says.
That probably is something we would want to consider for the Loxahatchee Slough, because I think impoundment means they stop the flow, basically with a dam, and then they let the nutrients settle, and the fresh water only, or largely, goes to where they want it to go. So that might be something that we want to keep the Loxahatchee Slough lake water clean.
Well, yeah, and that's at Hungry Land. You can see 6, that's where the C-18 is. And they've got 1, 2, and 6 that are underway. 4, 5, 3, 7, 8, 9 are all.
What is 6 called?
That's the C-18 West Impoundment.
Okay. Well, we need to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Clea.
Right, so because you see, they have all of this flow direction, look at the arrows, they're flowing in, they're all flowing towards us.
And that's you're currently.
Here's us, right here.
You're currently looking at South Florida Water Management District website?
No, this was, I took a screenshot of their presentation while I was listening to
Oh,
them talk.
okay,
This was
alright.
not given out, I don't know if it's out anywhere, but this was a screenshot from this is her, right there, presenting to,
I think-
here's Mindy Parrott up here, I think. She was presenting at the task force meeting.
I think if I Google it on the search engine at the.
Like you're saying, it should be public record, we
I
would
would
think.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, South Florida Water Management District website. I'm gonna check it and see if I can get, but that's gotta be on their website. They've been working on this for 20 years. Website for Locks River,
It's just hard to find any,
fresh water. Okay. All righty.
so, but I would think that that would probably be an item to bring up to council too at our quarterly update. You know, the Loxahatchee River, the coast, you know. I would think just off the top of our heads, again, the comp plan completion and the coastal resiliency and the trees and the river. I mean, those are some, I think those have all been very,
big ones.
right,
Mm-hmm.
and broad, so it's not all in, you know, we've touched on things with those, but if you guys want to bring back anything else you think for the next meeting and we can discuss, that would be wonderful. Do we have any other, let's see, is there any other comments on the upcoming agenda, or the presentation to council? No? All right, that brings us to the end of the regular agenda. Comments from committee members, village council, liaison, and staff?
I've had my say.
Anything?
Did we
No.
approve the minutes?
Pardon,
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, you were out.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Are we still have an interest in someone giving a talk on coral reef?
Yes, and again, so I had reached out to Mindy Parrott and had provided the dates that we had available for future presentations, and was nervous to email somebody else and give them the same dates in case she came back and had said, I was thinking we would really want to find out what's going on with the Loxahatchee River.
Well, we can have more than one presentation, right?
I don't,
Well,
you know, you see how long this
no.
one went? It's almost
I
not
get it,
fair
I
to
get
rush
it.
them through them.
Yeah.
So I'm not a fan of having two on one meeting. But since we haven't heard from her, yes, so the South,
right.
you know, we'll reach out and see if we can get them to come for the, you know, for a next meeting
Because
or
I
in the
have reached
future.
out to 3 different organizations that I think would be applicable to this.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Okay.
And I let them know every Wednesday, or second Wednesday of the month,
Is-
every month.
Is Wendy the director at South Florida Water Management District?
Mindy Parrott, or are you talking about,
I said
Wendy, but
Parrott.
you meant Mindy?
Is Parrott the director?
I don't know, she was just, she presented,
Holly want a cracker?
yeah, she just presented, I'm not sure, actually, oops, goodness gracious. I don't know, I'm not sure if she is or not, she just had her, you know, questions and then her email at the end of the presentation, so that's,
Interesting.
I emailed with questions,
Parrott.
mparrott@sfwmd.gov.
Because usually the directors, they don't meet with anybody. They're, you know, they're way up
Right.
there.
Well, again, then we can reach out to South Florida Water Management, but I will definitely see that if we can get somebody else for the reefs, if they're not able to come. You know, I just would love to have this presented
100%.
sooner rather than later. But yes, all right, let's see here.
Yeah, she's a senior program coordinator.
Okay, well then she's,
She wrote questions and gave
She's
us her
the-
email.
she would be the right person for that. She's
Right.
in charge of that and reports to the director of South Florida.
I
Water
think she's
Management.
just aware that, you know, Jupiter and Tequesta, that could potentially, that's, you know, getting us, the more we know, the more of a headache I think it becomes for them, is what I would think. But hopefully not. Hopefully this is something we're excited about and fully support, you know? We're just curious. And I made a comment too, which I don't know if I'd mentioned last time, but they have included a portion that's native knowledge that they're including in the planning process. And so I had just said that, you know, say something pops up that they have to, there's a problem that they have to figure out an alternative solution for, it would be nice if we would be able to be aware of that or give any native or local knowledge that we might have that might help with that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think.
Do you remember the date? Was it March 20th that she gave that presentation? Because it is on their website, if this is it.
Yeah.
It looks like it. Storage.
They didn't, no, she did not present all of this at all, but if it's got,
Oh, that looks familiar now.
well, that looks very similar to the slide on Tequesta, but yes.
All right, I'll tool around.
Oh, yeah, and now you think you're like 2 away from us, maybe. It would be, but yeah, there's definitely, it's just, I would like for them to come and tell us what the
100%,
things are,
yeah.
you know, it's like, come on, let's, so, I think holding them to the fire with ADJOURNMENT, you know, whether you're reaching, I don't,
Yeah,
I think
that
the
is-
more the better, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But this one is all encompassing.
It's got everything.
entire
Well,
South
again,
Florida.
this was like, and then here's the Loxahatchee. We just breezed right over that because it's just our little old Loxahatchee.
Right.
And so that's why I would love to have some more information on
Yeah,
what's going
okay,
on there.
Good deal.
Yeah. All right, guys. We had no comments, committee, village staff, or village liaison. No, nothing. Okay, future agenda items.
Well, we're working on them.
Right, we just, okay. Any other matters? No?
I'll make a motion to
Adjourn?
adjourn.
All right.
Second it?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. All those against?
No one's ever against
Just kidding.
adjournment.
Bye, Marcia. Thanks for coming.